Welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Sorry so much for that little bit of delay. I just told Brian before we started here, I'm having a little bit of technical issues. And of course, my internet went haywire as I hit the live stream. But you are live here with us today on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I have an exciting talk, of course, joined by my man, Brian Smith. Brian, we don't usually get to do these podcasts together, man. So I'm excited to have you on, talk some offensive linemen. Again, apologize to the people in the chat. I know there was just like dead air there for about a minute and 30 seconds where you're like, what the heck? You guys are live, but we're here to go. We're good to go. Connection is stable. So we are ready to rock and roll on the 2025 offensive line board for Notre Dame. Folks, we're also going to do a mailbag at the end. So if you just want to throw MBs in the chat, we already have 10, 15 questions before anything even before the show even began here. So keep throwing in those mailbag questions. You got me and Mr. Smith here today. Brian, it's a really exciting class for Notre Dame in 2025. I mean, we've talked a lot about it on the show, but Notre Dame has a lot of traction early on with a lot of big-time players in the 2025 class. This is kind of more full scope. You know, we've talked about the traction they've had with some really good defensive linemen already. I know a couple right in your backyard, including Davion Dixon, who's already committed to the class, having their tight end in the class in Nate Roberts, and having a lot of wide receivers that are very seemingly interested in Notre Dame. Deuce Knight having Notre Dame as one of his top two schools along with the University of Tennessee. Like, Notre Dame is in a good spot, but I would argue as of today, Notre Dame might be in the best spot positionally on the offensive line, even though they don't have a commit in this class, and nationally, really talented group. I know that we were texting about this a little bit yesterday, but there's a lot of talented offensive linemen in the 2025 class, man. I know there's one in Michigan that really has you excited, but just overall, Brian, I think I'm really excited because this 2025 class, offensive line-wise, has a lot of talent that I'm ready to dive into, man.
A lot of it is from very pro, so I'm good with that. New York, Connecticut, Michigan, those kind of states obviously benefit Notre Dame, Wisconsin. So you're not fighting the weather, you're not fighting the SEC as much. Makes it a lot better. Big thumbs up for me on that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I know that we are going to work in. So, folks, how we're going to kind of phrase this into 3 different segments. Again, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast if you aren't already. 5-star reviews are very much appreciated as we get us kicked off here. We're going to talk about the Notre Dame 2025 board. And we're going to kind of group this thing based upon what the early traction is for Notre Dame. So there's some players that I would say right now today, Notre Dame is in excellent spots with. If the recruitment ended today, I would say that the pick would most likely be Notre Dame. And there's some other kids where I'd say Notre Dame's in the top group. Like, they are right there in the conversation. And there's another couple that I would call there's work to be done. And I think there's actions that need to be seen, right? Like, there's one elite player on the board specifically for Notre Dame where I say I need to see him get on campus before I even start thinking that is a vague possibility, to be honest with y'all. So we're going to break down this board. Also going to watch some film in the middle section. So you guys are going to get our instant reaction and just what we've seen on film of these 2025 players early on in this process, because we are just in July, and we're talking about kids that are just about to be juniors in high school. So there's a lot of room that needs to be done, and a lot of calls that need to be had and visits that need to be taken. And there's only two commits in the class for Notre Dame in 2025. So a lot of time left for this class, and offensive line recruiting is going to be very important. And I really want to start us off, Brian, because this is my opinion. I would love to hear your opinion on this one. So Notre Dame has arguably one of the best offensive line coaches in all of college football in Harry Hiestand. I mean, I don't even think it's that arguable. I mean, you look at the guy's resume, all the players he's put in the NFL, the Zach Martins, the Ronnie Stanleys, the Quentin Nelsons, the Mike McGlincheys, a lot of first-round picks on his pedigree. You lose Harry Hiestand to retirement this offseason. And, of course, Joe Rudolph comes in, who has a good reputation as an O-line developer, as a recruiter. And to be very honest, if we're talking about the 2024 class, it's not over, by the way. We'll talk about one big domino that still needs to fall in the 2024 class a little bit here. But we see, Brian, instantly a couple evaluations that I frankly don't agree with Coach Rudolph early on. He really pushes for Anthony Knapp out of Roswell, Georgia. We'll see, obviously, if he was 100% correct on that one. but he still gets Styles Prescott into the class. He's trending well with Gerby Lambert in the 2024 class. So things were still looking like it's going to end up like a really good offensive line group in 2024. But I would argue, I would love to hear if you agree or kind of see it a little bit differently. 2025 is actually going to be our first true indicator of how good of a recruiter Joe Rudolph can be at Notre Dame, because we're only going to see a little bit in 2024. And there was already a commitment in the class, and the board had already been pretty much set by this staff. So I think 2025 is going to be a year for Joe Rudolph. We're really going to figure out how dynamic of a recruiter he can be at the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah, because it's start to finish. You've got to identify talent. You've got to get in with it. You got to go travel to see it, make connections at the high school. That process is not fun. It's a long process. Like you mentioned Knapp. Notre Dame recruits Atlanta a little bit, but that's never a given. So you give him credit. It was a kid he had a relationship with before he came to Notre Dame. That's fine. But now you got to do that across the board, and you're selling Notre Dame instead of Virginia Tech, Wisconsin, whatever. How well does he adapt to that long-term big picture? You never know until you do it, because Notre Dame is a very unique brand. Some of my friends who hate Notre Dame, like Notre Dame, anywhere in between, they always say, well, what's the campus like if they haven't been? And it doesn't matter if you like them or not. I say, you got to go. And I'm sure it's somewhere in that fashion in terms of working for Notre Dame, because while every job's a college football job, there's only one Notre Dame and the pressures and all that. So seeing how he adapts to it and how he fits in with the rest of the staff and how they come together on who they offer and who they really prioritize, that's a big deal, because you'll kind of get an idea of what he wants his offensive line to look like long term. So I'm pretty interested to see that as well.
I mean, that's very true. And I would say that if Coach Rudolph is able to land Gerby Lambert, which we feel really good about today, we feel like that Notre Dame is in a great spot to land. Obviously, the great offensive lineman out of Catholic Memorial up in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. If they're able to get him, that solidifies the 2024 offensive line class. So you would have Gerby Lambert, Styles Prescott, Peter Jones, and Anthony Knapp. That's pretty good for a first cycle, right? And you were able, if you're Coach Rudolph, to come in, build a relationship with, and land the top offensive lineman on their board in Gerby Lambert. Like, that was a big domino for this 2024 class. That would be a great telling step. But 2025 is really going to do it. Brian, I really wanted to hit on a few of the things, because we're going to talk about a lot of offensive linemen, some different body types, different position flexibility, different guys that project to different spots. But I have learned over the last few weeks and couple months, just talking to recruits and just eyeing players that Coach Rudolph has offered and what he's really looking for, I think we foundationally found what Joe Rudolph is valuing in an offensive lineman, just in general, and I think that this goes back to the Wisconsin days. I think it goes back to even before that when he was at the University of Pittsburgh and he had guys like Brian O'Neill. I mean, he had some good offensive lines at Pittsburgh as well. We are foundationally, I think, beginning to understand what is he looking for in an offensive lineman. And we actually had Rowan Byrne on the show last week, who was a great offensive tackle that we'll actually talk about out of Iona Prep up in New York. And he talked a little bit about some of the foundational things that he looks for. And I think that this stuff is important. One, and this is when we're talking about 2025 class, if Notre Dame's able to land Gerby Lambert, we think the number right now is probably 4 for 2025 as far as how many offensive linemen they take. But transfer portal and early declarations and numbers can change so quickly. A kid goes back to school. You don't expect to go back to school. Numbers change all the time. But as of right now, we think 4 is the number for the 2025 offensive line group. Some things that Coach Rudolph is really looking for. And I think that some of it's foundational, and I think some of it's very unique. One, similar to what Coach Heastan liked, he likes offensive tackle body types. He likes length. He likes that long athletic frame that can develop. 2, position flexibility is a big thing for him. Rowan Byrne is a player that could potentially play right tackle on the college level, in my opinion. But Notre Dame likes him inside at guard and likes maybe even potentially playing center, down the line. He's a player that they say has 4 to 5 position flexibility. So based upon what he told me and just some other things I've heard, it sounds like to me, Brian, that like the bulk of the recruiting class on a year-to-year basis for Coach Rudolph, if there's 4 offensive linemen in the class, 3 of them he's going to try to make true offensive tackles, guys that can project favorably to play offensive tackle. Then the last guy is going to be, if he is an interior player, has to be a guy that can potentially project to 3 or more positions. Has to. He's not taking a center only. He's not taking only a right guard. He is taking a guy that could potentially play right tackle, could play guard, could play center, could play both interior guard spots, could play center as well. He wants guys that have that position flexibility. And the third thing, which I thought was pretty unique, because I think we get this misconception of Wisconsin football over the last few years, or under Coach Rudolph's time, that they're just these big lumbering offensive linemen that can't move. Well, one thing he told Rowan Bird, Brian, which I thought was really interesting, was I like you inside because you can move, because I want to get guys to the perimeter. I want to pull them. I want to get to the second level. I want to run screens. So I thought it was really interesting. We're talking about offensive tackle body types. We're talking about position flexibility, and get rid of this notion that you could just hide an unathletic, strong offensive lineman inside. He wants foot quickness and athleticism on his offensive line.
I'm okay with that. I remember in the 80s and 90s when Nebraska was obviously a totally different program, and I'm being kind, they had a lot of linemen that got out in space. They obviously didn't throw it a lot, but when they ran a screen, if you were an inch out of place, their linemen were in the right spots, and it was a wall down the sideline, and it was 6. Those kinds of plays. Wisconsin, without the option, has been Nebraska. They've just been power football. So that's interesting. And when he was at Pittsburgh, still a lot of that. Now he's going to get, I mean, I'm not picking on Pittsburgh, but like Virginia Tech, they're not recruiting from the same shelf Notre Dame is for the most part at offensive line either. So you have to look at it from a little bit different perspective. And I also think that he's going to be able to get, at minimum, I know he wants 3 a lot of the time, get at least 2 tackles in every class that he's happy with. Yeah. Even if you just got 2 and then the next year 3, it'll work itself out because, again, he's pulling from a higher level. So if he's getting the versatility he wants to, this will work out pretty well.
Yeah, and I think most of the things are pretty similar to Coach Easton. Like, he loved offensive tackle body types. And another thing that I think is very important is I was wondering how big the board would be for Notre Dame as far as how many offensive linemen on the board, because some programs run that differently. A lot of coaches run that differently. Coach Easton kept a very small board, Brian. He's like, these are my guys. Oh. That's it. Like, those are priorities, right? Joe Rudolph sounds like he has a similar terminology to that, a similar vantage point to that. He is only going to recruit guys that are priorities to him. Rowan Byrne talked about that a lot. If you are offered by the University of Notre Dame by Joe Rudolph, it means that he wants you, right? Like, there's no guessing game as far as like, am I a take? Am I not a take? Like, you're a take because you're a good football player and he wants you there. So that's kind of what we have learned. I think it's super interesting just to kind of, when we're talking about 2025 folks, because I know me, Brian, and Brian Driscoll, and most of the IB family, we're a little bit more nerds than the average fan with this type of stuff. But I'm incredibly interested when we're talking about projecting what the 2025 offensive line group is going to look like, that we need to keep these things in mind, right? Body flexibility, the ability to play inside, to play multiple spots, offensive tackle backgrounds. Those things are very important. And I know everyone loves to play this game of, why doesn't Notre Dame look at X player and Z player that have not been offered? Just remember these things. All due respect to Sam Mustipher, who was a really good starting center at the University of Notre Dame, I'm not so sure he would be a guy that Joe Rudolph would really prioritize in a class just because he's 6'2". He's going to be a guy that needs to play strictly inside to be a successful football player. And that's nothing wrong with that. He ended up being a very good center, and he's played in the NFL for several years. So, like, good player, right? But I'm not sure that would be him anymore. Does that make sense, Brian? Like, I'm not sure that would be a guy that he would really value heavily.
Yeah, I would say that Rudolph has a very broad sense of what he wants in an offensive lineman, and he wants parts that can move around. And I'm sure part of that is injury. If your tackle goes down, it's not often you say, well, my guard's going to move out. But if your guard was recruited as a tackle, then it's okay. And usually tackle is the more athletic guy. I know Rudolph wants his guards to pull, but that's part of the reason he's trying to recruit so many tackles. So it's a different philosophy than what some other guys might have. But if it's worked for him for this long, why would he jump ship? So I'm glad that he's looking at it that way. He stand, except for a few guys, to be honest, and I know you mentioned this, trying to think, like, who was the guys that, okay, Mustipher's and that, anybody like who else in the last 5 years they recruited pure inside that's been a dude?
Not many. Not many. Not many. Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
tackle, guard. So,
yeah. I mean, the only guys I can think of, Brian, I mean, because they ended like Tristan Hodge didn't even play at Notre Dame. He ended up transferring to BYU, but like he was a center, right? Like he was a pure center that was just, he was going to be an interior offensive lineman. Like there was no doubt about it. So yeah, I mean, you make a point. Even Tommy Kramer ended up being a nice starting guard at Notre Dame, but even he started at offensive tackle his freshman year. So to your point, yes. So I think that there are a lot of things that are going to stay consistent to Coach Heastand's ideology with a couple different things that'll be kind of sprinkled in. So keep that in mind as you start to work through this 2025 offensive line board. So Brian, I wanted to keep this into a little bit of segments. I wanted to talk about guys that I think Notre Dame is in the best place with today, guys that I feel best about, and then we'll kind of work it down to guys that they are in the game for, absolutely, and then work it down a little bit further to the recruits are saying the right things, but I need to see them visit campus. I need to see a little bit more action, obviously, to really feel great about it. So I want to start with an offensive tackle that Notre Dame fans, I think, know about very much because he is visited now. Sorry, he is going to be visiting his third time this offseason, July 30th, for the recruiting cookout. And people that don't have that list, you can go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. We have a visitor list up there. It's like 20 deep in the 2025 class. Like it is an impressive list. And a couple offensive linemen that we're talking about today are going to be on campus, including Owen Strebig, who is out of Catholic Memorial. And I saw someone just said audio is choppy. Is it choppy when I'm speaking or Brian speaks? If someone could just put that in the chat, I'd very much appreciate it because we'll be able to fix that on either one of our ends. I'm not sure who it is. So Owen Strebig, offensive tackle out of Catholic Memorial in the state of Wisconsin, 6'8" listed, 290 pounds. As again, guys, we're talking about kids that just finished up their sophomore year. So sophomore year going into junior year this season. And this young man now will be on campus 3 times, Brian, this offseason. When we talk about, all right, and I will fix that in a second as soon as Brian begins to speak. Sorry, folks. So, Brian, I wanted to talk about this young man because 3 times to campus this offseason, it obviously is very telling. Owen Strebig likes Notre Dame. We'll talk about the timeline for him, just some of the latest stuff, but he's going to be on campus July 30th. And this is a really talented player who, if people remember Catholic Memorial in the state of Wisconsin, they'll remember in the 2024 class, Notre Dame was very high on their running back, Corey Smith, for a while. Obviously, he ends up committing to the University of Penn State, So they weren't able to get him. But Notre Dame feels good about where they are. And I think that it's, 3 times one offseason, Brian. We always talk about, like, show me the action, right? The action says that he is obviously very highly interested in University of Notre Dame.
Yeah, if you're a 3-time visiting a school in, say, 4 to 6 months, the actions speak louder than anything else. And quite frankly, I would say it's a situation where that school, and in this case, Notre Dame, is in a good spot. Also of note, and I don't understand why this is, Wisconsin's recruiting O-line pretty well, but it's pretty much all out of state. Used to be they got everybody in state. I don't know what's going on there. They've had a mass exodus in that state. Penn State, even Minnesota came in and got a kid. So it's a little easier now. Notre Dame, obviously, Billy Schroth came in and got him. That state is not like it used to be. And I'm not really sure why, but that makes me feel a little better because that is one state it didn't matter who it was for the longest time. If Wisconsin wanted the kid, it was over.
They're going to get him.
Especially offensive. And I wouldn't even fault it. Name a school that you could say has been more consistent with O-line than the Badgers in the last 25 years. You could make an argument they've been as good, if not better, than anyone. They're at least in the discussion. So this kid, though, he can play left tackle or he can play right tackle. His length is ridiculous. The only thing I'm really curious about, like anything else, he's got 2 years of high school left, and he's already humongous. Like, how big is he going to get, and which side does he fit better? That I don't know yet.
Right. Yeah, and I'm excited to watch the film on Owen Strebig, and if people could just put in the chat if my audio sounds a little bit better. Hopefully it's a little bit better, folks. Sorry again. I think it's a little bit of the I don't think it's the microphone. I think it's the Wi-Fi because I had a little bit of internet issues coming into today's show, as you saw if you were with us at the beginning of the show. But I agree with you, man. I think that it's going to be very interesting because we don't talk about many sophomores that are 6'8", 300, 290 pounds. There's some people that list them only at 6'7". Fine. 6'7" or 6'8", you're still really dang tall for your age, right? Like you're a really big kid. And to your point, Brian, Billy Strouthgrade was an interesting one. Joe Brunner ends up staying at Wisconsin. He was another big in-state kid that year. But Carson Hinsman, who's expected to be the starting center at Ohio State this year, was the other guy that got out of state. And we have said, and Owen has said, Wisconsin's in like high on his list, right? So this isn't like a runaway. It's just Notre Dame. But if you ask me today, how do I feel about Owen Strebig and Notre Dame's chances? I feel really good about him, man. I feel really good. Because one, he has consistently just been so adamant about his feelings about Joe Rudolph. He loves Coach Rudolph. He loves it. And I think that his Wisconsin roots are a big help to him. I think he's a guy that he's known for a little while, right? Like he knows who Joe Rudolph is. He's talked about his ability to just be able to talk ball with him, sit down, watch some film together. That's great stuff. And again, the proof is in the pudding. I think that he's been to Notre Dame more times this offseason than he's been to the University of Wisconsin. And he's a Wisconsin kid. Like that is a very telling thing, like, isn't it? So being able to get him back on campus, he's a kid that is saying that I'm not going to force this process. I'm not going to, just make a rash decision. So in theory, as we stand today, Owen Strebig is not expected to make a decision anytime over the next couple months. But if the visit goes great on the 30th, I think that those things could always get escalated a little bit, right? Like, because at some point, that this for offensive linemen too. Offensive linemen typically don't love the recruiting process. They just kind of want to find their fits, and they just want to kind of keep it moving, man. Like Charles Jagasaw in the 2023 class for Notre Dame was the perfect example, Brian. I remember him. It was like, when's he going to commit? When he's going to commit? It's just like Charleston wasn't doing it just because he wanted to see the recruiting process. Him and his mom just wanted to see all these schools and hear what they had to say to him and just finish off the process that way. There's a lot of kids in this class that feel the same. And Owen Strebig does feel that way to me as far as if he knows, I think he'll make a decision. So nothing is imminent there, but you have to feel good about where you are if you're Notre Dame with Owen Strebig, as well as another guy we've had on the podcast, Rowan Byrne, Iona Prep in New York. Brian, I don't know what they're feeding these kids, man. Everybody on this list is like 6'6 plus, 290 plus pounds. It's absolutely insane. Again, we're talking about kids that just finished a sophomore year of high school. This kid's a mauler, man. Cool note on him. He camped at Notre Dame and spent a couple days this offseason at Notre Dame, and he earned his scholarship offer, but based upon how he performed at the camp. He got to work with Coach Rudolph. He got to work with some of the GAs that are, specializing in the offensive line side of things. And he got his opportunity to get a scholarship from the University of Notre Dame. Originally, what was going to happen was, as far as timeline's concerned, he was going to visit the University of Michigan at the end of the month. He was going to visit Texas A&M. And then he was going to go to the Notre Dame-Ohio State game, the Wisconsin-Ohio State game in the season. That was going to be his visits. What happened is he canceled his Texas A&M visit at the end of the month because of just money-wise, it just didn't make much sense. And honestly, he wasn't very high on Texas A&M. He just kind of wanted to have that experience. He'd never seen an SEC school. He just kind of wanted to go down south like he had never done that before. But he has told me, and he said it right on our podcast, 3 top schools for him: Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Michigan. Those are the 3 schools. He's going to see Notre Dame on the 30th. Going to end up coming for the barbecue, the cookout. Sorry, every time I say barbecue, people are like, oh, they cooking brisket or they just doing hamburgers and hot dogs. I'm like, sorry, folks. I think they're just doing hamburgers and hot dogs most likely. My apologies. But he's going to visit the end of the month, Brian, and then he'll be back for the Notre Dame-Ohio State game, which obviously will be big. This is another one. He told me that he does not want to make a decision until next offseason. So we'll see if it happens or if it gets moved up, all that great stuff. But another kid Notre Dame has to feel really good about today. I would say Notre Dame's the leader. I would say at first they're number 2, but I really think that they are the leader. But they are battling with some of the premier programs as far as offensive line developments, right? Like you mentioned Wisconsin, and you go back to the Joe Thomas and Kevin Zeitler and all those cats, and even more recently, the Logan Brusses of the world. And they've put out some really good offensive linemen, Peter Kahns, and there's been a lot of them. And then University of Michigan, back-to-back Joe Moore award-winning offensive lines, obviously under Coach Sharon Moore. They're going to have to battle a couple of the big dogs, Brian, which makes it fun for me, man. I love that an offensive lineman looks at 3 of the best offensive line producers and says, that's the 3 schools that I want to go to. And Notre Dame has to beat out Michigan and Wisconsin. I think they can, but of course, it's going to be a battle to say the least.
Well, he's a Notre Dame fan. That helps. He's been to the camp, so he knows what the head coach is like. He knows what the offensive line and the coordinators like, et cetera. I'm more curious now to see what he has to say about Wisconsin and Michigan. I don't know how much he's interacted with them or how hard they prioritized him, but I think it's going to be pretty hard to overcome Notre Dame. Michigan scares me more than Wisconsin because, they were just in the playoffs like 2 years in a row. That at the end, if it's not those 2 schools, I would be surprised just based on tradition and all that. But Wisconsin's weird to project. Like I said, they struggle more in-state right now than they do out-of-state. I don't know how to grade that. I've never seen that before with Wisconsin.
Brian, you know what else is kind of weird too is that Wisconsin now, because obviously Luke Fickell comes in, right, who I think is a really good coach. So I think he's going to do a good job at Wisconsin. But they are completely changing foundationally how they run an offense. They used to be –
That's a 180, brother.
Yes. Punch you in the mouth, get downhill, run the football. Now they're going to the air raid. So it's going to be
I think it might take a year or so. It could go bad early. I honestly believe it. Yeah. They don't have the players outside to do that. I don't
think so either.
And I'm not trying to be mean.
I wonder honestly because, I'm really curious to see how offensive linemen, what their viewpoint of it is, because I think the big selling point to Wisconsin for so long is that what do offensive linemen like to do, Brian? Do they like to play in pass protection all the time, or do they like get after dudes, right? Like they want to get after dudes and get downhill. I'm not sure. I don't know. Because, again, I've just talked about 2 kids in a row, Owen Strebig and Rowan Byrne, that both do like Wisconsin. So, it's not like they're not getting any traction, but it's not like it's not like an easy sell as it once was to me as far as seeing foundationally what this offense looks like. We'll see, it could be a finesse offense this year, though. I'm not sure. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah. It's going to be weird for me to say air raid in Wisconsin in the same sentence. So weird, I'm just stating that for the record. It's just not a normal deal, man. It's almost sacrilege.
It's not. It is. No, it really is, man. Brian, has there ever been? I'm trying to think of the last few years, but over the last few years, has there been a bigger 180 shift of a program foundationally, what they were successful with, to now what they're going to do? Man, I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll see, though.
The only one I can think of is when Colorado started passing the football in the early 90s. But they had Cordell Stewart, so it worked out. I don't think Cordell Stewart's – I don't think he's in Madison right now. So,
yeah. I was thinking of maybe when Paul Johnson went to Georgia Tech, I guess, right? Going to the triple option, sure,
I don't know if
I guess.
Any offensive line coach that even considered taking that next Georgia Tech job needed to have his head examined. You had no chance. No chance.
Oh, gosh. What a mess that situation was. Now, I don't know. We'll that's a different conversation for a different day. But, yes, it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years because they went with their interim coach, right? Georgia Tech. Didn't they go with
they sure did.
Brett Key? I think so, yeah. So, we'll see how that works out. I'm not sure. But, yeah, so we'll see what Wisconsin looks like, how offensive linemen perceive University of Wisconsin, because to your point, they have been an O-line factory over the last 25 years, but foundationally, it's a changing process for what the offense is going to look like. But two of the top offensive linemen on the board for Notre Dame, Owen Strebing and Rowan Byrne, are heavily considering Wisconsin. So they are a threat for Notre Dame, and they need to obviously be able to counteract them. Moving on to Greenwich, Connecticut, Brunswick School. A couple Connecticut kids have been offered by Notre Dame after their performances at their evaluation camps this summer. This is Maddie Augustine, who, if Brunswick School sounds familiar to some, you're going to be hearing their name a lot because Notre Dame's also recruiting their safety, Ethan Long, in the 2025 class. He's a very talented player. Both of them will be on campus July 30th for the cookout as well. So both of the Brunswick School kids will be there 2025. Brian, this is like the traditional – this is kind of how I like to build an offensive line class of – look, I want a couple studs up top. I want guys that are going to be guys as long as they develop properly. And then I'm okay taking a little bit of a swing at a player that has developmental upside, but probably not a year one or maybe even year two contributor. He's going to need a little bit of maturing physically. And that's Maddie Augustine for me. Again, I'm talking about a kid that's going to be a junior in high school. Maybe by the time he's a senior, he'll be 290 plus pounds, and this won't even be a talking point. But as of today, this young man is about 6'7", 260 pounds today. Was at the evaluation camp. Notre Dame loved how he moved. They loved how he looked. They loved the frame, the ability to put on weight. But he's one of those guys that, and he's going to be back on campus July 30th, like I already said. So high interest in Notre Dame, obviously. And Notre Dame likes him as well. So for people that are going to ask, is he a take? Yes, he is a take. If he wants to come to Notre Dame would take a commitment from Maddie Augustine today, by every indication. But this is one of those kids, Brian. I don't know how you feel about this, but being able to get a couple really good football players up top, a couple of studs, a little bit more of known commodities, and recruiting a kid that, hey, maybe year one, year two isn't going to be the best, but by year three, year four, if they're developed properly, they could become a stud. It's just that their body needs to mature a little bit and catch up to some of the other guys.
I don't have a problem with it at all. There's an offensive lineman that played in Philadelphia, then played at Notre Dame, and then was drafted to the 49ers. It's similar kind of deal. He was a basketball
just got paid
too.
a lot of money this offseason. Right.
Yeah, sometimes you can tell a little easier with some of the developmental guys than others. I was ecstatic the other day. For whatever reason, Joe Alt followed me on Twitter after I followed him. He doesn't need to follow anybody, but he's my favorite guy in college football.
He follows me too. He follows me too.
There you go.
So
there you go.
There. Yep.
He is a kid that was 255, 260, something like that. After we thought zero shot. He was playing his first 2 years. And then he's starting game 7 or something like that. That is one of the most, if not the most, surprising starter I've ever seen. But he put on 35 pounds in 6 months. So O-line is hard. It is really hard to evaluate. By the way, for those that don't know, his dad was a freaking dude in the NFL.
Yes.
Played at Iowa, played for the Chiefs forever, was 2-time Pro Bowler.
In the Chiefs Hall of Fame. So
yeah. He wasn't a guy. He was, so he had him to help. That matters. But still, if you can get a kid and I watched his film a bunch yesterday, as a high upside kid, and let's just say you get Byrne and Strebing, okay. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay. You don't have to sell me very hard. That can't be your top guy, because if it's your top guy and you miss, then we're in trouble.
Yes.
I've been listening to a whole bunch of podcasts all over the networks about these previews, and somebody will say, well, what's the biggest need? Every single guy says O-line is their biggest concern. Every single person. And it's O-line, and I've talked to some people that are scouts. College football is not very good right now at O-line. It's just not. I don't know.
It's not.
I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm not an O-line coach anyway, but literally every podcast I listen to is O-line. And I'm man, that's not what you want to hear, because it takes the longest to develop too. You can bring in a transfer receiver or a running back or something. O-line, man, that's there's no shortcut there, brother. That's rough. So that's why I always get nervous with O-line recruiting if you don't get 4 guys, and a couple of them are pretty sure bets.
100%. And that's why that Joe Waltz, Blake Fisher class was so weird, Brian, because to your point, it's like guys aren't usually ready to play year one. Like they're not. I mean, Blake Fisher was starting game 1 for the University of Notre Dame, and Joe Waltz started 8 football games after being a 260-pound tight end in high school, like to your point. So, yeah, I mean, but that's an anomaly, folks. Like that does not happen very often. I mean, Zach Martin redshirted as a true freshman. You know, Quentin Nelson redshirted as a true freshman. Ronnie Stanley redshirted as a true freshman. Like those guys, Mike McGlinchey redshirted as a true freshman. Like those, it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen too often. Fortunately, Notre Dame had 2 in the same year, which is pretty wild to think about.
In my lifetime, the only freshman that was really good is Ryan Harris. That like throughout this, Justin Hall in the late 80s, early 90s, started a couple games and got hurt for Holtz, but he was massive for his time. That's it. And then you get 2 in 1 year. What are the odds?
Yeah. When we talk about early declarations for the NFL draft, we're not usually talking about third-year player offensive linemen go to the NFL. Like that doesn't happen too often. Like it just doesn't. I mean, it just doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean, even you think Quentin Nelson went back for his 4th year. I mean, and that kid was about as easy of an evaluation as you will ever see. It's like, yep, that kid's very good. Like it's yes. So, I mean, Ronnie Stanley went back for his 4th year. I mean, those things always happen. So to your point, like guys don't play a ton early. The trajectory is usually year 2, year 3 when their bodies truly develop. And I think that's what Matty Augustine is. Again, we'll watch the film on him later. He's a good player, man. Like he's talented, but he's not there yet, obviously. And a lot of it is the Emil Wagner stuff, right? It's like Emil Wagner was incredibly talented. Will his body fill out properly? And those concerns are always there because most of the time their bodies do fill out fine and they're good. But then other times they don't. I think of like Nicholas Petit-Frere that played for Ohio State. I don't think his body filled out properly. I don't think it did. I think he put too much weight on his frame. And I think it kind of messed up his athleticism a little bit. I think it zapped some of his athleticism. So that's the concerns you have with those kids that are a little bit of developmental players. Most of the time they work out. Sometimes they don't. That's just kind of why it's a conversation point for me. Brian, let's go to our last Connecticut guy who was another player who got offered at an evaluation camp this offseason. That is Will Black. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this high school entirely wrong, so my apologies. He's out of Wallingford, Connecticut, Choate Rosemary Hall. I know I'm pronouncing Choate. Is it Choate? I don't know. Someone put it in the chat to correct me because I know I pronounced that terribly wrong. But another guy, Brian, listed 6'7", 295 pounds, massive young man who film is very interesting. I talked to him recently, Brian. We talked about some of the O-line factories up north. He mentioned an interesting one as his top 2 schools. Notre Dame, Penn State. Those are the 2 top schools for him for the Connecticut product. So Penn State is quietly done a really good job in recruiting in 2024. I feel like people aren't talking about that enough. James Franklin has done a tremendous job as a recruiter at Penn State. There's a lot of talent on the roster. I always joke about it. If James Franklin ever moves on or gets fired at some point in his career over the next few years, the next Penn State coach is going to walk into that job and be like, oh my gosh, this is a landmine of talent that I just landed into here. But another team that Notre Dame is going to have to outlast, University of Penn State, who has had some good offensive linemen over the years at times. They have a really good one in Olu Fashanu, who's projected to be a top 10 pick in the 2024 NFL draft. So Penn State, Brian, a team that is recruiting at a high level.
Penn State's O-line coach is just a recruiter. I forget the guy's name, but he's active.
Phil Troutwine used to play for Penn State. Excuse me. Yep.
Yeah, they hit Jersey, Maryland, Virginia hard, New York, etc. The same areas that Notre Dame does. Notre Dame 35 years ago, this was the school they recruited against the most, was Penn State, and it's kind of come back around because Notre Dame's done a better job out east. But this is interesting because if you talk about the O-line class overall, as you mentioned in the intro, it's good. It's insanely good in the Northeast, which I have no idea why, but it is. And again, if you can battle Penn State, maybe Michigan or Ohio State or something, that's one thing. It's much harder to go down south and battle Georgia, Arkansas, LSU, Alabama. dealing with a different culture and different weather and all that. So this is the easier road. In Penn State, I think, not only is that one kid going to get drafted, they've got a couple other guys that have a chance to be NFL players too. It's going to be harder to beat Penn State now because they can say, look what we did with these kids. Notre Dame's been able to do that for a long time, but it's a new O-line coach, it's a new head coach, et cetera. I'm curious to see how Notre Dame and Penn State are going to battle for kids.
I'm interested too, especially on the offensive line, because you mentioned Troutwine. He's a really good recruiter, and people don't talk about this enough, but Penn State has one of the best offensive lines returning in the 2023 season.
Absolutely.
I mentioned Olufashanu, Caden Wallace. You had, what was the big-time recruit that they had that's playing guard now? His name is just absolutely escaping me. Landon Tangwall. Yep. Tangwall, who is a really talented kid. I know he was injured a lot last year, but obviously very talented. Former high 4-star recruit. So I think that Penn State is going to have a very good offensive line in 2023. They're going to have a kid that's going to go in the top 10 more than likely at offensive tackle. So they could start to really get some traction on the offensive line recruiting perspective, because they've gotten some guys, obviously, but continue to that pipeline, I think, could be big for them. So they could pursue with a player like Will Black out of the state of Connecticut. Again, Notre Dame, Penn State. I had it recently in an update with Will on the website at irishbreakdown.com. You should go listen, read that article if you haven't already. He is a player that Notre Dame likes. He likes Notre Dame, obviously, as well. Top 2 school for him. He is not going to be visiting for the 30th, unfortunately, this month for the cookout. But I expect him, because I think he's most likely just kind of closing his visits down for the rest of the summer. I think he's just going to do game visits is kind of what it sounds like, unless things change. So I think he's a kid that probably will be at a game for Notre Dame more than likely. I can't imagine that Ohio State game visitor list. That is going to be absolutely nutty. But that's Will Black, again, out of the state of Connecticut, 2025, 6'7", 295 pounds. That's kind of the top group right now as far as guys that we feel Notre Dame has great traction with. I think that out of that top group, you could convince me that 3 out of 4 at least of those Notre Dame would get today if those kids decide to make a college decision today. Now, that's not obviously how that works, but I think that you feel really good about where you are with Owen Strebig, Rowan Byrd, Matty Augustine, and Will Black. They are in a very good spot. I wanted to go next, Brian. We're actually just going to kind of put these 3 players into the same category a little bit. These are players that there's some traction with, or they're saying all the right things about Notre Dame, but I just need to see a little bit more to feel good about some of these kids. And we have a couple potentially elite players in this class. I want to start with a guy, actually, that I know you're a big fan of, and I want you to gush over him a little bit, because I know that you really like Avery Gatch, who is an offensive lineman out of Wiley E. Groves High School in Franklin, Michigan, who has been to the University of Notre Dame. He came to Notre Dame for the blue and gold game this spring. I actually saw him in person because he was doing his little interviews with Tom Lemming there. And that kid is a big dude, man. 6'5", 290 pounds. No bad weight on him, though, man. He is just a massive, massive kid. And we were texting yesterday, and you told me, I like that kid out of Michigan, man. I like that kid.
He has the power that you just think about when you think of power football, running downhill, old school Lou Holtz football to a T. And he's also a kid that did well when he got out in space. He could find a way to move and change his direction quickly. Usually big, heavy guys don't do that. But like you said, he doesn't have a sloppy body. He's a very athletic kid. I don't know if he's wrestled, track, something, but he's conditioned a little better than most big offensive linemen that you find in the Midwest. I think he can play guard or tackle. Really doesn't matter. And to use him as an example, maybe a better athlete, but Tommy Kramer type, that like one-on-one on 3rd and 1, you could run behind Tommy and it's not much fun for the defensive lineman. He's like that, but I think he's a better athlete. So not quite as heavy, but similar kind of style.
Yes, I agree. He is and we're going to watch film on him a little bit later. So this is a heavy-handed mauler is how I would frame Avery Gatch. He is a physical cat. And we talked about mostly offensive tackles in the first group, like Owen Strebig's an offensive tackle. Will Black's an offensive tackle. Rowan Byrne is a guy that is projected by Notre Dame to play inside at guard or center. So he's more the interior player that they like. Matty Augustine is definitely a tackle on the college level. Avery Gatch, for me, Brian, is the one guy that I say that's a pure guard. Like, that is a kid that is going to be super physical. I think he can play center. Like, there's no reason to think that he can't. I think he can play right tackle if you wanted him to. But I watch him and I'm like, that demeanor is at guard, right? Like, that's a guy that you want to just absolutely manhandle dudes at the point of attack. So Notre Dame has some traction with Avery, but again, he's in the state of Michigan. I know he's high on the Michigan schools in general, Michigan and Michigan State. Are you going to be able to get him on another visit? Are you going to be able to get him out of the state of Michigan? That's where my hesitation comes from, just a little bit. I think that he likes Notre Dame enough to visit, obviously. Will they be able to get him for a second visit is my biggest question. If they do, then I start to go like, oh, okay, maybe there's a little more traction there than originally anticipated.
The Ohio State game. The Ohio State game for a kid like him, it's not that far away. I mean, I don't know exactly where Franklin, Michigan. I have no idea, but I mean, it's one state. If you can't get him down for that game, that's not a good sign. So that would be the first indicator for me.
And yes, there is a mailbag today, so someone put in the chat. MB's in the chat for any questions that you already have. I think 16 questions. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Brian. But I think that's one of the advantages of Notre Dame with the board right now is that, to your point, there's not a lot of guys outside of the Midwest or Northeast that Notre Dame is really prioritizing to this point. So we're talking about guys that are a rock throw away from South Bend, Indiana, that can easily make that trip. I mean, and most of these guys, actually, all the guys that we've talked about so far have visited Notre Dame. So, like, yes, they're obviously a great step there. Actually, I want to couple these next two guys together, Brian, because I think that's the best way to do this. These are guys that Notre Dame likes a lot, that pretty much all of college football likes a lot, but are two of the most talented offensive linemen that I've seen in the last couple of years. People all want to start the conversation with David Sanders Jr. out of Providence Day in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I 100% get it. We'll watch film on David. He is fantastic. The best offensive tackle in this class, in my opinion, would have been the best offensive tackle in the 2024 class if he was eligible to come out as a sophomore in high school. Like, he's that good, folks. I really do believe that. He is a phenomenal football player. But I also want to add Josh Petty to this conversation, who's at a Fellowship Christian school in Roswell, Georgia. Roswell sounds familiar. It's because we already talked about Notre Dame got a commitment from Anthony Knapp in the 2024 class that is also out of Roswell, Georgia. Roswell High School in Georgia. So not the same high school, but the same city. So Josh Petty, Brian, David Sanders, this is where we kind of are with both guys. And I just want to talk quickly about like just how special these kids are, in my opinion. David Sanders has said all the right things about Notre Dame. When he's asked about them, loves Notre Dame, wanted an offer from Notre Dame, wants to check out Notre Dame, all those great things, right? And it's awesome to hear. But he's never been to Notre Dame, and he's being recruited by everybody and their mother. Everybody. So it is not going to be an easy pull to get him out of the SEC, out of the Southeast, in my opinion. It's not going to be easy. He's a North Carolina kid, so like it's not like he's heavy in the South, right? Like, he could still move up to the Midwest and the Northeast and all that stuff. But the push for a guy like Sanders is going to be tremendous at a high level. So I said everything right about Notre Dame. I just want to see him get up to campus. Get up to campus, and then maybe we start talking about this one more. Maybe we start. The other guy, Josh Petty, who I just had a recruiting update a couple of days ago out of the state of Georgia. This is another young man where says all the right things about Georgia. About Georgia. He says the right things about Georgia as well. He says all the right things about the University of Notre Dame, which is fantastic. He says that he wants to visit, loves Joe Rudolph. He was raving about Joe Rudolph in the interview I did with him. I mean, he was bringing him up prompted about, like, I think he's going to do tremendous there. I love Coach Rudolph. Love it. Love it. Love him. Love him. He's going to do a great job at Notre Dame. I was like, that's awesome, man. That's a great review for him. I was like, if I was Coach Rudolph, I'd be like writing that down as oh, see what these guys say about me, right? Josh Petty, 6'5", 265 pounds. We'll watch film on him. I think David Sanders is the best offensive tackle class in this class, Brian. But I don't think Josh Petty's far behind, man. I think that kid is really, really good. He said that he's going to get up to Notre Dame, make that trip happen. Make that trip happen, then I'm like, okay. Because he even listed some of the schools he likes, and there was only like 4 or 5 of them. I think 5. And Notre Dame was included in that list, right? And so he mentioned like Oregon, a couple SEC schools. He mentioned Notre Dame. He has a couple of trips already planned for summer, though, and obviously Notre Dame is not one of them as of right now. So get Josh Petty up to campus, we start talking about him more. Get David Sanders up to campus, we start talking about him more. But those players, in my opinion, are elite. Those are the types of kids that if Notre Dame is able to get David Sanders, a 5-star potential, I mean, he's the best player I've watched in the 2025 class so far, in my opinion. And Josh Petty, who's a top 20 player by, I think, 2 different platforms at this point. And again, he's a Georgia kid, so getting him out of Roswell, Georgia, all due respect, Anthony Knapp, it's a lot easier to get Anthony Knapp out of Georgia than it's going to be to get Josh Petty out of Georgia. Like, that's just kind of the reality that we live in. Those players are fantastic, O'Brien. Those are the cream of the crop in this class. But Notre Dame has made an impact with them. It's just about, can we make a higher level impact? That's my biggest question.
Well, if you don't get them on campus this fall, do you really have a chance? That's the first question I have. I've met Sanders. I've met him at Under Armour, and he fits Notre Dame to a T. That's good. But again, does his mom have an interest in him leaving home? What other values does he have besides football? I mean, how much does he want academics and all that? All those things play into him making the trip north. Maybe it's the USC game or something like that. But some of these kids, not just at O-line, but the 25 class in general, we need to see them make that trip up north. Historically, yes, the kids that visit unofficially and then take an official visit, the chances of landing goes up like 3-4 times. It's just been that way for as long as I remember. The kids that Notre Dame gets, especially away from home, that take one visit are a very small list. Very small and very small.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's – again, it was great to get a couple guys to take official visits last year. Like, I think Richard Young was one guy last year, right, that Notre Dame was able to convince to take an official visit. But to your point, Brian, it's like that was his only visit ever to Notre Dame. Like, multiple visits is usually the telltale sign that, like, there's legitimate interest here, right? And you have a legitimate chance at this player. So I agree. These kids are going into their junior year. Get a David Sanders, get a Josh Petty up to campus. If you're able to do so, then we can start to talk about these guys. We can start to talk about them a little bit more. As of right now, I'm just like, they're unrealistic as of today. Could that change? Could change very quickly. If Notre Dame gets Josh Petty up to campus and he loves it, then let's have the conversation continuously. Like, that's where it is. And he's not afraid to travel. He's taken trips out to Oregon this year, this offseason, and Stanford as well as a place that he's going to go see. So he's not afraid to travel outside of the SEC domain, but still going to be a tough little grab for Notre Dame. But get him on a visit, we'll see what happens. So that's kind of the board for you all, folks. Again, talking about the groupings, feel good about where Notre Dame is with Owen Strebig out of Catholic Memorial in Wisconsin, Rowan Byrne out of Iona Prep in New York. We had Brunswick School offensive tackle Maddie Augustine out of Connecticut. We also had out of the state of Connecticut, Will Black, talented 6'7", 295-pound offensive lineman. Feel good about where Notre Dame, good to very good with where they are with that group. And then you start to get into the Aver Gatches of the world out of Michigan, Josh Petty out of Fellowship Christian in Georgia, and David Sanders Jr. out of the state of North Carolina. Some traction there, different levels with each of those 3 guys, but we just want to see more. Get them on campus, see if this is legitimate. That's the telltale sign that there is legitimate. I say it like this, Brian. I think there's a lot of kids that are intrigued by Notre Dame, but are you interested in Notre Dame? That's a very big different thing, right? There's intrigue coming into a vision usually. Like Micah Gilbert was a great one last year out of North Carolina, right? That's committed to Notre Dame in 2024. I think he was very intrigued by Notre Dame, but then he got on campus and then he became interested in Notre Dame. Like, that's a big, very different thing, in my opinion. So that's the offensive line board, folks. We're going to jump at the film in a second, but that is going to do it for the 2025 offensive line board for the University of Notre Dame and players that you need to keep a close eye on. Brian, film time? You ready for it, brother? I know you're a film nerd, so let's get into it, man. We're gonna kind of bring it up the way we introduce some of these players. So we're gonna start at some of the offensive linemen that we like where Notre Dame is at the best at this time. This film, and I apologize if it's a little bit slow on my end because I had this all set up and it was all great, and then my computer internet crashed, and then I got pushed out of this out of StreamYard, and it was very annoying. But Brian, I want to start us off with Owen Strebig, who again, offensive lineman out of the state of Wisconsin, Catholic Memorial. Hopefully that this film is getting pulled up here. It looks like it's loading. Hopefully it pulls up at some point. Come on, film. Let's go. It's not working. Why are you not working? Let me try to get this back up in a second. But we're talking about Owen Strebig as soon as this film. Oh, there it is. All right. So the unfortunate thing about Owen's film is that Owen doesn't have huddle film, Brian. I don't know if people have noticed this.
I know.
But Owen only has YouTube film. So we're going to watch YouTube. We're going to see what it looks like. Let's take a look at, again, Owen Strebig, 2025 tackle out of the state of Wisconsin. I think for me, Brian, the first thing that pops off is that this kid is a massive young man. He is just less than 6'7", 6'8", 290 pounds, and he is every bit of that, in my opinion. Every bit of that.
He can move well in space. I don't have any problems with him playing left tackle, to be honest with you. He can bend really well for a big kid, too. He's not a kid that's a waist bender. He can get down low for a kid his height, and that's really important, especially in the run game. If you're going to root guys out of there, you got to be able to bend, and he's a big boy. Yes.
That was probably the best thing that I loved about him, Brian, was like, because I think the immediate conversation that you're going to have is, again, 6'7", 6'8". Can he bend well enough to be a premier pass protector at left tackle? And I watched him, I'm like, this kid bends well for his size, man. Like, he moves incredibly well. I think his foot quickness is good, and he knows how to use his length, which I think is big time. So, again, we're talking about a 6'7", 6'8" kid that I think could legitimately stay at left tackle, to your points. But I think at worst, he's a really good right tackle at the next level. I really think so.
It's still amazing to me that Wisconsin might lose another great offensive lineman out of their home state. It's amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, but, oh, man, it is amazing. But, I mean,
it's their own fault.
It's been a wild ride for Wisconsin recruiting an offensive lineman. It's been a wild ride.
Looks like we just lost Ryan for a moment. I'm not sure what is going on with his internet, but he'll be back in here in just a minute. As a quick note on Owen Strebig, at his age, I can't really think of a kid that I would compare him to other than somebody like Mike Rosenthal, who played in Notre Dame in the mid to late 90s. Rosenthal ended up playing guard and tackle. He got really big. I think he would have been better if he would have kept some of the weight off. Strebig right now is a little under 300 pounds. If he can stay at 305 to 300, not going to be a pretty successful player. If he ends up going just into this big, massive guy, it's going to be harder to stay on the edge and play left. Maybe he can play right tackle, but he bends well enough he can play either of the guard spots too. Usually kids that are 6'6" and above, that can be a question mark. Oh, and I don't think that's going to be a problem for him. Most of his film, it shows him also, he's been coached well. He's more polished than most kids. And I also think he's a guy that has the ability to play in the screen game a little bit better than most. Kids that are that long, sometimes it takes them a little bit to get going in space, that first step, second step to transition. I've been through his film 3-4 times. I don't think there's going to be any problem with that. And after, like most kids, he'll probably redshirt his freshman year. He'll have a chance to be a big-time player really quickly. So with that being said, I'm not really sure if there's any chance that he's going to, commit and start really quickly at Notre Dame, but he has a chance to play pretty early anywhere. And Notre Dame's depth chart on the offensive line is about as good as any's in the country. So that's impressive. So Ryan's internet is not being very friendly, so don't be surprised. Out of this list, I'm just going to kind of get my own take on it. If I can only take one kid that I said was going to be really good in college from this entire list, I would take Gotch. He's the kid from Michigan. As Ryan noticed, interior line is probably his best spot. He can play tackle, but he's super physical. He's a polished kid. He's a mauler. He knows who he is. He embraces it. I think he has the highest guarantee, if you will, that he's going to hammer it, and he's just going to be a great player. Strebig is the kid that I think is next on the list, but it's just harder to project offensive tackles because you don't know how big they're going to get. Ryan and I both talked about Mr. Alt. He was a great player. Then his son, Joe, tremendous athlete, but he was 260 coming out of high school. Nobody had any idea. And, of course, he ends up starting at Notre Dame as a true freshman. That's utterly ridiculous. He's the rarest offensive lineman probably in Notre Dame history in terms of his transformation in just a short amount of time. Looking at the list overall, the kid that I need to see more that I'm intrigued by would be Black, the kid from the state of Connecticut. He can be physical. He can play inside. He can play tackle. He can do whatever you want. But I think he has a tremendous amount of upside. And a little bit like Strebig, I'm not sure exactly which spot he's going to play, but I do like Will Black a lot. So that's something to think about. Ryan, there you are.
I'm there. I'm sorry, Brian. I hope everyone can hear me okay out there. Look, folks, I'm not sure what's going on here. Internet was being a little bit wonky, and then I started trying to play film, and then my internet gets overloaded. So what we're going to do here, we'll watch offensive line highlights in the future. We'll watch some film down the line, but we're going to just move to the mailbag in a second. So I already have 17 great questions in the chat, so keep throwing those questions in. It's just going to be a little bit of an extra long mailbag today, which is no problem with us. We'll answer as many questions as you want. So deep apologies to you all right now, though. I deeply apologize. I really haven't had internet issues in several months, and all of a sudden,
welcome to the internet. It's
man. Oh gosh, it's just so frustrating, man. I have done every single thing possible to figure out internet, and it's been really good over the last few months. But here we are today. So we're gonna move on to a mailbag in a second. If you could please, before we get going here, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know that when we're on each and every day this week. IB Nation Sports Talk, of course, will be tonight, 6 o'clock Eastern. And we'll be obviously back tomorrow at our regular 1 o'clock Eastern time. And I'll be doing the mailbag this week as well with Mr. Vince D'Addario. So me and Vince will be back later in the week to kind of work through some mailbag questions. Make sure, folks, because Brian Driscoll did a fantastic update on the message board last night, gave you a little bit of taste of what some intel he's hearing about the 2023 team, the defensive line and the linebackers, some notes, some things that he's hearing from his sources close to the program. So make sure to go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. You'll also be getting my intel as far as the players that are going to be on campus on the 30th this month for the barbecue. I mean, it is an outrageous list of players that we're going to be able to see Notre Dame obviously get a shot at in the 2025 class. We're also expecting a wide host of 2024 commits to be on campus as well to help recruit some of these kids. So make sure to go to boards.irishbreakdown.com for all the latest happening. But that's going to do it for this portion of Notre Dame Hour on the Irish Breakdown podcast. All right, Brian, you know the old saying, man. The show must go on. Even when there is bad connection and bad internet, we continue here because we have a lot of great questions. So let's get into some of these questions here. And again, mailbag questions into the chat, and we will roll through a bunch of these. So first question of the day goes to Garrett Knutson. Says, of the young offensive tackles we have on our roster, on the Notre Dame roster, who projects best at moving inside if needed? So if we're talking about the young guys on the roster, Garen, including the 2023 kids that just came to campus. We're going to talk about. Oh, you think it's easy? Oh, it is easy, actually. But you could say it to start us off. Go ahead.
Jagasaw.
Yes.
I think it's Jagasaw, the kid they just signed, because he can kill people. He's a horse. That's who I would pick.
Yeah. I just saw that you had commented in the chat and said something about Jagasaw, which, yes, because I agree with you 100%. I have been on the wavelength, Brian. I don't know if you agree with this, but if Charles Jagasaw comes in and he is an absolute dude early, right, where you're just like, man, this guy's just different than what we have in this roster. By midseason, I wouldn't be shocked if he is a guy that you look at and say, like, you're a starting guard for us this year, and then you'll play tackle next year when one of the guys leaves. Like, he's that type of dude. Because to your point, I saw him. I know he's listed at 6'6", 300 pounds on the roster, but I saw him down at San Antonio for the All-American Bowl, and he told me he was up to 320 pounds at that point. And he looked good, man. I was like,
really?
You know who he reminds me of? Yeah. He said he was up to 325 pounds. He reminds me, body type-wise, of Trey Smith. I could see him being 6'6", 330, and just like looking massive, but not looking fat. You know what I mean? Just like a big hulking dude. Like, I could see him being that type of player. Although I think that he is a more natural tackle than what Trey was when he went to the University of Tennessee. But I think body type, they remind me a little bit of one another.
If you can get him on the starting lineup, I really don't care where it's at. The athleticism and all that. Wasn't he a wrestler at one point? Or I can't remember. He's a pure athlete.
Not just a wrestler, Brian, was an undefeated heavyweight state champion for 2 straight years in the state of Illinois. And I know he wasn't at the highest classification in the world in Illinois, so people like to bring that up. I don't care either. I don't care either, man. He's just a really talented kid. And I felt so bad for him. We've shared this story before, but Charles was not going to early enrollee because he was going to defend his state championship in wrestling. He wanted to spend the winter and do all that type of stuff. But then obviously he had the knee injury where he had to clean it up this offseason. So he had them. Not only was he not able to enroll early, he missed the cutoff date from doing that by 2 days because he was rethinking enrolling early because he wasn't able to wrestle. So he had to just kind of sit around and rehab for several months. Right, yeah. Dude, it was literally, I talked about it in San Antonio, and he was like, I wanted to wrestle, so I wasn't going to early enroll. And then I had to get the surgery, so I was like, okay, I might as well just go to Notre Dame now and just enroll early and do all that type of stuff. He missed the cutoff by 2 days to enroll early. I felt so bad for him, man. So bad. But
do you think it would have been the same case at Alabama?
No. They were like, oh, he said that in 6 days ago. You just missed the facts, right? Like, yeah, 100%.
Nick would have called and said he gets straight A's. Shut up, and that would have been the end of the conversation.
Exactly. He has a 4.0 GPA. What are you worried about, man? Like, yeah, exactly. But I think he's a great pick. Right? Is there even another one that makes much sense? Like, I'll say this one. The other one that I think makes sense. Notre Dame, I think, has intentions to play Sullivan Absher at offensive tackle to begin his career out of the state of North Carolina. Big, 6'7", 6'6.5", 6'7", 315-pound offensive lineman. Big kid. I think that he is a guard long-term in Notre Dame's offense because I think that kid just wants to play in tight spaces and beat people up. Like, that's kind of what I see with Sullivan. So I could see Sully being the other guy that moves inside. Outside of that, like, I'm not moving Emil Wagner inside. Like, he's 6'6.5" and 278 pounds right now, right? Like, that's not a guard at the next level. So I think Sullivan Absher is the other guy, but outside of that, I don't think that besides him and Jagasaw, I don't think there's many guys that I would even want to move inside potentially. Like, those are the 2 guys for me.
Yeah, I don't think it's any doubt. Jagasaw could play. I don't know if he could play center, but I bet he could play any of the other spots. That would be my feeling. He's just a good. I'm not saying he couldn't play center, but I wouldn't use him there because he's a guy I want out on the edge. Once he kind of figures college out, I'd rather have him at tackle if he, figures it out because physically, he's just built a little different. He's an NFL player.
Oh, he's an NFL player. I agree 100%. If he's developed properly, he definitely has that upside. And Nathan just asked, they thought Jagasaw broke his foot. No, Nathan, it was a PCL, I think, was actually his injury. He had to get his knee cleaned up. So there was just a little PCL injury, if I remember correctly. So it was not a foot. Next question is going to be from Michael. Michael, and Garen, thank you so much for that question. That was a really good one. Michael, anything new regarding 2024 wide receiver recruiting? Any new names, or is it currently a wait-and-see situation? Thanks. Michael, it's mostly a wait-and-see situation. We talked about this on the message board a little bit, and he had put it on Twitter, so it's not like a huge secret, but Breedell Richardson is trying to get down to campus the end of this month or the beginning of August. Like, that's a name, I guess, to look at a little bit. We'll see what happens with that situation. Obviously, he's down in the state of Florida, a very talented wide receiver, but we'll see what obviously happens with that. But I think that it's mostly wait-and-see mode. There's not really – if we were going to put out legitimate names – you need to go to boards.irishbreakdown.com because obviously there's still some work that's being happened down behind the scenes. But I will say the staff is doing their due diligence on that part. So there are things happening behind the scenes. So just keep an eye out for names as we are able to drop them. We had another question. We had another question here from Gary Knutson who says, do you foresee Blake Fisher moving to guard at the next level? Where do you see he could have the best career at the NFL level? Brian, I think that he's an offensive guard at the next level. I do, on the NFL level, because I think that there's two things that hurt Blake, and hurt's a bad word for one of these things. One, I think his temperament and his demeanor and his play style is that of an interior offensive lineman. I think he is best moving forward. That's what I think. Down blocking, base blocking, like just working to the second level. That's where Blake's best spot is. I think that he's a fine pass protector. He's fine. But I think at inside a guard, I think that you can really get the most out of his game. And I also don't think he has the greatest length of all time. I know he's 6'6", but I don't think his arms are incredibly long. Like, I just don't see great length when I look at his arm length. So I think he is going to be a guard on the next level. Could he last at offensive tackle? I think it's possible, but I think more than likely he's probably a guard in the NFL level. So that's just kind of my perspective. I don't know if you see him differently.
I think he can play either. It depends on the scheme and it depends on who they have at tackle.
Yep.
I mean, I've always said I thought he was best at guard, but he's such an athlete, he kind of figures it out. He's a gamer. His length is not ideal, but if he puts his hands on you, it is bad news for you. He has very heavy hands, and he's a guy that finds a way to get in front of you. If it's a screen, if it's a straight downhill run, if it's pass pro, whatever, he just has great feet. Great feet usually win the battle most times.
Yes, absolutely. And one cool thing, I don't know if you saw the picture of, it was Audric Estime, it was Joe Walt, it was Blake Fisher, it was Benjamin Morrison and Sam Hartman with Coach Freeman at the Mets game. Blake Fisher has reshaped his body this offseason, Brian. He looks good, man. He's cut a lot of the baby weight off. He looks really good, man. So maybe the flexibility improves a little bit. Maybe the foot quickness is just a little tad bit better. And I think that he can potentially, well, he's definitely going to play offensive tackle on the college level. There's no doubt. But we'll see, obviously, the projection, because he looks like a completely different athlete this year. Like, he's really reshaped his body, which was great to see. We had a couple super chats. Thank you so much. This one is from Nathan with the super chat, who just says, let's go IB, great intel piece. Yes, Nathan, unfortunately, Brian is not on the show with us today. Brian Driscoll, that is, but he put out a great intel piece, obviously, on Sunday over the weekend, which is another reason to sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We also had another super chat. This one is from, as it pulls up, from Truman Theodore Dumel, who says, is there a recruit who can put Notre Dame over the top if we land him a generational talent? I guess we're talking about 2025 class. Brian, I think this is a fascinating question as far as like putting Notre Dame over the top, because I think it depends on what team you're talking about, right? Because there are positions that'll put different teams over the top. For Notre Dame, it's been quarterback has been a spot that maybe needs to be a little better, maybe a wide receiver at times that needs to be a little bit better. Cornerback is a spot that Notre Dame has improved tremendously. But like David Sanders isn't going to put Notre Dame over the top, in my opinion, because Notre Dame is very good at offensive line. Like, it's not like they've struggled at offensive line. You know what I mean? So 2025, if Deuce Knight is properly developed, could he put Notre Dame over the top? Sure. I think so. Yeah. I mean, Could Bryce Underwood put the team over the top? It's possible. I think it would be quarterback, though. I don't know if you agree with that.
Have you seen Elijah Griffin's film?
Yes, yes. Talented defensive lineman. Yes, I have seen this. But
Look,
he's
my
what
dead
you call a
grandmother
man
could
sports.
coach her. My dead grandmother could coach him. Okay, there's certain players. It's just this is not fair. And you can tell he's got hand placement. He has technique. Like as a sophomore, he was one of the 4 or 5 best defensive linemen I saw in the country.
Yeah,
and he could play anywhere on the D line, and he's 270, 280. He is a top 5 pick. He's the guy who could change Notre Dame's program.
he is ridiculous, man. I saw Brian the first time I saw him. I hadn't even seen game film on him. Tom Lemming did an interview with him where he was wearing like a Letterman jacket, and I'm like, that's a sophomore in high school. Like, what are we talking about right here, man? Like, and then I saw him film, and I'm just like, that kid could play any spot he wants to on the defensive line, and he would dominate at it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, literally, even though he's only 275, 280 pounds, you can line up at nose today at Notre Dame and be like, yep, go for it, Elijah. Like, you're real good. You can line him up at Viper. You can line him up at Big End. You can line him up at 3 Tech. It doesn't matter. That kid is, yes. I think the 2 best players that I have personally seen in the 2025 class today are David Sanders and Elijah Griffin. I think those are the 2 best for me.
I actually am going to head up that way. I'm probably going to go see Elijah. I might ask him if there's a way I can get those 2 to do a workout together just so I could film it. That would
right?
be like for real. I mean, you might as well compete against the best. Let's get it, bro. Let's get it. I would cherish that video forever.
Man. That would be a battle because both of them are just like, David Sanders is interesting because he's like 6'7", 255 pounds right now, right? So he's a little bit skinny, but he's so strong though for being as skinny as he is. Like
you can pump it into it with his one hand, and he's moving dudes. He's unbelievably talented.
It's crazy, man. If his body is able to hold the weight properly and he can maintain that strength and it improves, it's like that kid is going to be ridiculous. Elijah Griffin, I'm just mostly curious to see not only where Elijah led, because Elijah's been offered by Notre Dame, but obviously I don't foresee that happening. I just don't foresee it where it is at today. But I'm interested, Brian, to your point of, one, depending on what school he ends up with, that kid could play so many different spots. Like he really could. I mean, he reminds me of it's a better version, but similar to, you remember when Robert Kimdichie came out of Grayson High School? Like same type of kid, man. It's like that kid could play a lot of different spots, right? Elijah Griffin's kind of the same thing. It's like he could be a 4-3 defensive end. He could be a 3 tech. He could be a 3-4, 5 tech, like a 4-4-I. He could do a lot of different things. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he looks like in a couple years. Because he could be, I could see Elijah Griffin being 6'4", 315 pound 3 tech in a few years, or he could be a 6'4", 285 pound 4-3 defensive end and just be a terror. Like, I just think there's a few different ways that his body could go.
I'm curious to see if he cares about playing in the 3-4 or not, because Georgia and Alabama want him, but a lot of kids don't want to play in the 3-4. I don't know what Elijah's thoughts are on that, but if he's not interested in that, then the board is open, because he's like Georgia's number 1 guy. I know that's their guy. Maybe he doesn't want to play in a 3-4. His recruitment could get very interesting.
It really could. It's going to be really interesting, man. Yeah, because I guess, what do you think it is? Tackle for loss and sack production? Like he doesn't want to 2-gap a ton up front? Like he wants to be a tag style player, I guess? Yeah.
With his quickness, I'd want to play in a 1-gap scheme. That's just me.
Agree.
But he can play whatever. He can figure it out. I'm not saying he's not capable. I just think it'd be more fun for him.
That's true. Very true. We had another question. Truman, great super chat. Thank you so much. Great conversation that worked off of that one. Garrett Knudsen says, with regards to Owen Strebig's timeline, as of right now, it seems pretty protracted. Is he a player that Notre Dame will wait on indefinitely? So, Garrett, we talked about this a little bit. I think that for a lot of players, and I respect it, right? For a lot of recruits, they have this plan, right? This long-term timeline of, I want to commit sometime around here. I want to take my, X amount of official visits. I'd love to say 5 official visits, but you could take so many official visits now if you feel like it. I want to do my tours. I want to check out SEC. I want to check out Midwest. I want to go out west to a certain school, whatever it is. I want to check all the boxes, right? But a lot of times we've seen this where a player will just know, right? Like you just know. And they're just like, all right, like I wanted to do all that, but like also, I mean, we just saw this a few times last in the 2023 class. I remember Jaden Greathouse was one, Brian, where it's like Jaden was like, I want to go into the season. I want to take some game visits and I'll make my decision. And then like 2 days later, he's like, you know what? Like, what am I watching it? Like, what do I need to see anymore? You know, like I've seen it all. And I think that Owen Strebig, again, this is no intel on Owen as much. This is just more a feeling of like, he obviously loves Notre Dame. He's been there. He's going to be there 3 times this offseason. I think that he could be a kid where if it clicks and he knows, the timeline changes. Like that's kind of where we are with that, right? So could it last a while? Yes. Could it be escalated quicker? I think it could. It's just about Notre Dame continuing to press that one. And not press as in, let's go, man, like make a decision, but press as in like, you're our guy. You're our guy. You're our authority. Will they wait on him? Depends what you mean by waits. Like, I think that I can't predict a year and a half out of, you know, is there always going to be a spot for Owen Strebig? Because you don't know what's going to happen with the board. You don't know how many spots are going to get taken up. I think that they love Owen Strebig. I think he's right at the top of their offensive line board. I think Notre Dame loves him. So there's going to be a spot for a long time. Will it be until National Signing Day of the senior year? I don't know, man. Like that's way too far out for me. I think that there is certainly a spot for him right now, and I think that Owen knows that. I think Notre Dame has made it very clear that he is a priority for that. We had another question. I think we had one for you directly, Brian. Yeah, we did. From PK, who says, Brian, what is your ideal physical attributes for guards and centers?
This one is really unique. My answer has changed a lot. And part of it's like what Coach Rudolph's doing. It used to be it's the 6'3" guy, very quick, low base, power. You didn't worry as much about the ability to pass block. But now, because of RPO, because of getting out of the screen game more, etc., you need more length than just sheer athleticism. A 6'5", 310 guy is just as likely as a guy that's 6'3", 302. Like in the 80s and 90s, 6'3" guy could play tackle a lot of the time. It's completely changed. I mean, what is it? What do you think Byrne is, Ryan? 6'6" at least, legitimately? And he could play guard in Notre Dame?
So he's listed 6'6". I think he's probably more 6'5", 6'5 and a half. But like either way, I mean, he's still a pretty tall dude. You know what's weird, Brian? You know what's he's a massive kid. You know what's weird though is Coach Rudolph compared him to a player. Ready for this one? They compared him to. Oh man, his name's escaping me now. He's now the starting center for the Dallas Cowboys. He played center for Wisconsin. What's his name? Oh,
really?
Why is his name?
That would not be the guy that I would think of as center because he reminds me of a power guard, and that's okay.
Yes.
But if he can snap with his power, then Byrne is going to make a lot of money because he is another one. A whole lot of money. Because look, center is not fun. If you think about the difference between center and guard, it's just snapping. But just snapping is even that extra millisecond, there's a very unhappy 300-pound man with bad breath trying to come at you. Every little bit matters. And you also have to be able to do line calls and all that stuff too. It's a more complex position, but Byrne is a nasty player. And when he gets both hands on somebody, he's what I think of as a guard. Gotch, the kid from Michigan, he's a guy I think of as guard. But they're athletic enough. They could play tackle. It just may not be their ideal spot. They're just better athletes than what it used to be.
Yes, and I just looked it up. Tyler Biotish was the kid that I was thinking.
Oh, there we go. He was
a
hell of a college player. Absolutely.
Yes, really good. And apparently Coach Rudolph had compared them to one another as far as their position flexibility and their mindsets, which was kind of weird, man. I don't know. I don't envision Rowan Byrne being a center. Like I see guard there, but just very interesting to kind of just kind of look at and kind of think about. I mean, it's going to be interesting. My question, because I know this one was directly for you, Brian, but mine has also very much changed over the years, man. Because like, think about it from an NFL perspective, because that's where my roots are, right? The NFL draft side of things. Like 10 to 15 years ago, Jason Kelsey would have, like, that size profile, like, get the heck out of here. He can't play on the NFL level. He's too small, right? Like, he's too small. You can't play center on the NFL level. But now he's changed things a lot, right? Like him, the Garrett Bradburys of the world, the Tyler Linderbaums that came out of Iowa, obviously, last year, like the smaller, more athletic centers, they now have a place in the NFL. And it's because of the inside-outside zone hierarchy of the NFL. Like they want guys that can get on the move and be incredibly athletic. So those types of guys now much more they're much in higher demand than they once were. And offensive guards, again, I think some of those brutes mauling guards are getting phased out a little bit. Like, I think they're getting a little bit phased out. You want guards now that are traditionally former offensive tackles. And I'm talking more from like a college level, not as much, but like NFL, guys move players inside all the time where they're like, you're a college offensive tackle, but like you are a good offensive tackle athleticism. But if you're a guard, you're tremendous. Like, you're great inside. So it has certainly changed a lot over the years, and it will continue to change because we know that this is a cyclical conversation. Things change constantly. We had a question. I think there was another one for you, Brian, down here, which was an interesting one I wanted to get to. Yeah, Jason Smith. Jason's a great member of the board, always comes with great questions. Said, Brian, who was your favorite offensive lineman Notre Dame signed in the 2023 class? Of course, that is Charles Jagasaw, Sullivan Absher, Christopher Tarrick, Joe Otting, and I'm missing one. Oh, Sam Pendleton, who was the early enrollee, obviously, in the class.
Jagasaw is definitely number one, and Otang is number two. I think Jagasaw speaks for itself. Like, physically, I hate grading O linemen in general, especially interior O line. The film's usually terrible, etc. I remember seeing Jagasaw. Somebody said, you need to watch this kid. I'm thinking, okay, big kid in Illinois, whatever. And I'm like, whoa. Like, the way he moved his feet and stuff, I'm like, this is not a typical Illinois kid. This is a SEC offensive tackle if he wants to be, or he can play whatever. He's really strong. He is far and away the best lineman in this class. I don't think it's even all that close. I like the kid from Kansas. I don't know if is it Otang? How do you pronounce it? Is that correct?
Otting.
He just, for his size, is insanely strong, and he's a super athlete. He's the kind of kid that when I first started watching Notre Dame football that they were famous for. Needs to add a little weight, but he has the right kind of mindset. He's very physical. Like, he has zero concern. He wants to make sure your grandmother knows you're in pain. And he has the athleticism to get out in screens, student body left, etc. So he could be a center or a guard. I don't think he's a tackle, but he's such a good athlete that it doesn't really matter. He's a kid eventually that I think will be a starter at Notre Dame. I just don't know exactly where, but he'll find a spot.
Yeah, no, I like Joe Otting was my big sleeper in the class, Brian, because I understood why some platforms only had him as a 3-star. I think he ended up as a 4-star by 1 or 2, though. And I'm just like, that kid is just such a nice athlete because he's being projected to play center, most likely to be long. That's center. 5. He was a little bit taller than people even anticipated him being, which is going to be kind of interesting, I think, just kind of projecting forward. Again, I think he's a center guard at the Notre Dame level, but I liked him a lot too. So I agree with you. But Charles Jagasaw, just real quick, Brian, I'll say this. Junior film, I was incredibly intrigued by, and I liked a ton because he's just stupid athletic and strong. And you're like, okay, yeah, sure. But then you watch a senior film, you're like, okay, the game started slowing down.
The senior film is when I knew that he could play tackle. Like, guard was a lock. The senior film, I started thinking, well, he might even be able to play left tackle. It's not out of the question. There's still development there, but he's such a good athlete. At least at the college level, I think. I don't know about NFL. That's a long term down the road, but in college, he can play just about anything. He is a seriously talented young man.
Yeah. And I think Charles Jagasaw has a great claim in that class in general. I think, and apparently I'm having a little bit of some technical issues again. I'll reshuffle in a second, folks. My apologies. I don't know what happened there. But Brian, I would love to ask you this because I think that Charles Jagasaw has a great argument against some of the top offensive linemen in the 2023 class in general. The Samson Okalolas of the world, what was the kid's name that came out of IMG? The kid that's going to Miami as well. Francis Mayagoa. And so there was some really good offensive linemen in that class, though. One, how do you think Charles stacked up in that group? And was there a guy that you said that's the best guy in the class for me?
I know Francis really well because I lived close to IMG and I know him. That kid was different, not just like physically. He was one of the guys that literally scared me when I met him. Like he's that big and that strong. When I shook his hand and I reached down, I didn't see my own hand. So that's usually a good sign for an offensive lineman. And he took to the coaching at IMG Academy in the Under Armour Combine. He already has a starting position at Miami. Like he's mentally prepared. And he's playing tackle. I mean, I know Miami's O-line needed an overhaul, but dude, like really? I mean, so I'll go with him because he's earned it. But that's cheating a little bit because he's already in the starting lineup. That said, I thought Okunlola, if I had to pick a left tackle, was the most natural out of the group. But upside and intrigue was Jagasaw because he's not playing against the same kind of level of competition at IMG. Like every day, Francis went against guys in practice that were getting recruited by Georgia and Alabama. So right. He had the easiest road to get better. Yeah, that's a different deal.
And that's really interesting too, because I know Miami's a mess right now from a roster perspective, but Francis is going to be working with two of the better offensive line guys in the business. I mean, for everything that wasn't great year one under, the new coaching regime, head coach is a really good offensive line coach. And they also have Alex Mirabel, who was great over there at the University of Oregon under him as well. So he's going to be coached by some good offensive line developers. There's no doubt about that. So I think Francis is going to do really well. And Samson's down there as well. Okunlola out of the Northeast. So he's going to be a good football player as well. Really, it was a really good offensive tackle class because I forgot to mention Monroe Freeling, Brian, who was really good out of the state of South Carolina. That's down at Georgia, and he's a good player. He's a really good player. So it was a good offensive tackle group that year. All right, let's get to another one. This one's from Michael. Michael says, any positive vibes that Notre Dame could possibly expect some verbal commitments barbecue weekend? Thanks. Michael, I'll say this because I know people are keep asking this. I had made a comment, and I just want to kind of I want to just get it. I just want people to be a fully understanding of what my comment is. People ask me, what type of impact could the barbecue have on the 2025 class? And I looked at the visitor list, Brian, and I said that I think 7 to 8 of the kids on the visitor list could end up with Notre Dame eventually. I think that. That's not saying that 7 to 8 are going to commit while they're on campus on the 30th, folks. That's not what I'm saying because someone said that. And I'm just like, nope, that's not what I'm saying. Yeah. Could there be 1 to 2 commitments during the visit? It's very possible. I think it's possible. But I think ultimately the group that you're seeing that's going to take the visit on the 30th, that's a big pool of kids that Notre Dame wants very badly. And for most cases, they're kids that are going to be visiting 2-3 times to the University of Notre Dame. I mean, Brian, you've talked to one. Justin Thurman's going to be on class. Daniel Anderson's going to be on campus. The talented offensive lineman out of the state of Arkansas. They're going to have the offensive lineman that we talked about on campus. You're going to have Talon Taylor on campus. You're going to have a really talented safety crew of Ethan Long, a Jadon Blair, and there's a lot of dudes that are going to be down at Notre Dame on the 30th that Notre Dame likes a lot. So I think that 7 to 8 of that group could eventually be in the class. As for how many would commit during this visit, 1 to 2, possibly. It's possible. I think it really is. But that doesn't mean that they'll directly go like a verbal commitment. A silent commitment and a public commitment are 2 very different things, right? Some kids want to go silent, but also, want to just finish the visits and then they'll make the announcement afterwards. Timelines work differently. but I think that it could have a tremendous impact on this class. And that doesn't even count the fact that Deuce Knight's coming 3 days before the cookout and spending a couple of days at Notre Dame on the 27th. So the end of July could be huge for the recruiting in 2025. There's no doubt about that. All right, we had a question. Brian, I would love your outside perspective on this because you're obviously down there in the Southeast. And I know, are you in Texas right now or are you still in Florida right now? I know you kind of move around a little bit. You're in Florida now. Okay. So I would love your perspective because you're in SEC country. Obviously, you know a lot about Notre Dame football and have followed it for a long time. Michael wants to know, can you characterize how big a win against Ohio State would be to the Notre Dame program in all facets? Let's go from the recruiting perspective first. How big would that be for Notre Dame to be able to beat a team like Ohio State's this season?
Well, I just know from living down here that Notre Dame is not even remotely considered on the same level as Ohio State. It's not. It's not even close. And Notre Dame fans can get mad about that or whatever, but Ohio State is churning out NFL guys, and that's what these kids are looking at more than anything else. I mean, they win more too, but it's the first and second round draft picks. It's just not even close. And especially at some of the positions that are more fun, quarterback and receiver, they're a more exciting program. So it would elevate the program in a recruiting sense that it hasn't been on really in the last 20 years, potentially, because beating them is just looked at differently. Now, there is one caveat. If the quarterback for Ohio State, and I don't even know how that's going to play out, is bad or nowhere near, it won't hold as much. I mean, if they would have beaten the team last year on the road with a Heisman contender, that's a whole nother level. But obviously that didn't happen. But it's still Ohio State, and the receiver group they have is insane. So it would showcase Notre Dame's DBs. It would showcase their ability to score enough points because they're not winning with 21. Like Ohio State scored 21 last year. That was a weird game. That's not happening again. Notre Dame's going to need to score 35 or more. That's how you – if they don't need to, then something probably went wrong on Ohio State's level. So program momentum, it would help them. ESPN is not the biggest fan of Notre Dame. I think everybody knows that. All these networks would have to play it because they beat the Buckeyes. The amount of attention and how much it would hype them in the rankings and everything else would be almost infinite. You can't put a number on it. It would be huge.
Yeah, I think the other thing, because I think you made a great point there, is that like last year when Notre Dame beat Clemson and destroyed Clemson, I think it was a great game, obviously, for Notre Dame. But Brian, I think that while it was big for Notre Dame to beat a team like that, a team that had been so good for so long in Clemson and really had a great, obviously a great run and a couple national championships along the way. You beat Clemson last year the way that you would expect Notre Dame to beat a team, right? To be physical, downhill, running the football. If you're able to beat Ohio State, and let's say Benjamin Morrison has a great game against Marvin Harris Jr., and he only has like 5 catches for like 50-something yards, let's say, doesn't score. You're able to keep Emeka Egbuka in check a little bit. You're able to win on the outside at your wide receivers. Those are the spots that Notre Dame hasn't had enough big-time players consistently over the last X amount of years. If you're able to beat them, if you're able to beat Ohio State at their game, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Because there's a reality where Notre Dame's able to just beat up Ohio State on the line of scrimmage, right? Like Joe Wall, just is a better player that day than JT and Jack Sawyer and those cats, and you win a slugfest that way. But then there's another reality where, wow, Sam Hartman threw for 350 yards, and Tobias Merriweather had a couple touchdown catches, and Benjamin Morrison had an interception and held Marvin Harrison to five receptions on the game, and he didn't go off against them. Like, if they're able to do something like that, I think that is monumental. I think Notre Dame can take that momentum and be like, oh, we have wide receivers and course now that can actually play at this type of level. Like, that's my biggest thing is that, like, if you could beat Ohio State at their game, that's even more monumental than just beating Ohio State in general, because people will remember that.
I agree. They need to be able to show they can be a fun, entertaining offense. And I mean, that's why you went and signed Sam Hartman anyway. So if it's not rolling in that direction by the time they play the Buckeyes, we'll probably know anyway. Like something's went wrong here. So
Yes.
I'm not too concerned. Like, what is it? Hartman's got 110 career touchdown passes. I think they'll be good in that regard. That's a lot. So I'm good there.
Most in ACC history. So yes, that is a lot of touchdown passes. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, man. But if they're able to outdo Ohio State in Ohio State fashion, that could be a really interesting layer to talk about. Let's hope we're having that conversation. I would love to have the conversation. To your point, Brian, I think that recruiting wise, in order for Notre Dame to be one of the powers of recruiting, you need to claim the Midwest first, right? Like if I asked you right now, who is the recruiting power in the Midwest, you would say Ohio State. That's it, right? Mm-hmm. Like you would say Ohio State. And then after that, it's like, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan. Like they're good recruiters too, but Ohio State is that team right now. And it's the same thing on the field as it is in the recruiting battles. You need to beat Ohio State before you worry about beating Alabama, Georgia, and those cats. Like you gotta win your territory first before you start worrying about the SEC powers. Like you have to claim the Midwest, show that you can show up in the big games, and then we'll start having that conversation. But Notre Dame isn't there yet. It's trending in a positive direction, but obviously it needs to continue to build. There's no doubt. We had a question from Stevie Wonder. Stevie, I'm going to pull it up just because it's a mailbag question, but I don't have a direct answer for you. She said, any update on Joey Tonona? Is he on pace to graduate, still recovering? At the time of the accident, it sounded like there were some cognitive issues. Stevie, I'm going to pass this along to Brian and see if he can just get a little bit of intel, because obviously we have put out, great hope for Joey. Obviously was in the car accident last offseason. Hope he's doing really well. I don't have a direct update for you, but I'll make sure that you get one. So throw this chat in again, maybe next time I'm on with Brian. I'm sure I'll talk to him at that point about, if we can get some type of update on him. So, because he's obviously always a part of the Notre Dame family, Joey Tonona. So we hope that he's doing very well. I hope he's taking advantage of the Notre Dame degree and his opportunities for sure. We had another question from Darren Knutson who said, is Owen Street big timeline realistic, and how do you expect it to stay the same? Hit on this a little bit, Garen, so I'm not going to go super in depth with it. I think timelines can always change. Right now, Owen is obviously going to let it play out, and he has kind of a big understanding of, going into the season and taking his visits to games, and then going into next off season with kind of clarity and really kind of narrowing things down. But I think that stuff can always change, especially when you go to a campus 3 times in one off season. So we shall see. This is a very interesting one, Brian. A very interesting one. I really want to hear your perspective on this because I think I have an answer for it. But Garen Knutson also said, considering how deep the offensive line class in 2025 is, where would Gerby Lambert fit in the stacked class? That's an interesting one, man. Of course, Gerby Lambert, Catholic Memorial, out of West Roxbury, Massachusetts, top offensive tackle target for Notre Dame in the 2024 class. I guess we have the basis just off of sophomore film, right? All we've seen of the 2025 kids is sophomore film. So if we're talking about just sophomore film for Gerby comparative to these kids' sophomore film,
I'd take Sanders over anybody. I think you would too. But
yes.
Petty's in that ballpark, but Petty and Lambert are pretty similar. I mean, he would be like right under. Like Sanders is a very special player. He has a chance to be the first pick of the draft, kind of left tackle. Like if he doesn't go in the top 10, either he got in trouble or he got hurt or both. That's kind of how good it's up to him. And he's a very intelligent kid. He's going to a good school. He's got good people around him. He's outgoing. He's what the NFL wants on a poster. So I'll take him number 1 out of that group. After that, there's 5-6 guys that Lambert could be involved with, but I don't know which one I would pick. That's really hard.
Just based on sophomore film, I feel like I would definitely take Sanders. There's no doubt. I would also take Petty. It's a little bit of a different conversation because I would say this. I think that Gerby Lambert is a little more physically developed as a sophomore than what Petty is, because Petty's only like 265 pounds right now. He's a smaller cat. But I just really like Petty's athleticism and profile. I think he's going to be an absolute stud.
He reminds me of Ryan Harris that played in Notre Dame.
That's a good one. That's a really good comparison. I like that. I might steal that one, Brian, just so you know. I might steal it.
Well, I mean, they're almost identical at the same stage, literally. Almost identical.
Longer than you would expect, but like a little bit of a wiry frame. Like I could definitely see that. That's very interesting. Here's the one that has me struggling a little bit. I think I would take Owen Strebig as a sophomore over Gerby Lamberts. I do, but it's a conversation. It's definitely a conversation. It's not like a runaway, Strebig way over Gerby, but I think I would take him over him. But then I think that Gerby would fit right in like number 4 for me after a sophomore year, because I still think he's better as a sophomore than like Will Black was, who's on Notre Dame board. Because I haven't watched every offensive tackle in the class. I've only watched the kids mostly that Notre Dame has recruited, obviously, in this class. Yeah.
The 25.
Yeah. I know there's a lot.
In down south,
man.
Is,
yeah.
Yeah, there's some nasty bats.
Some people missed the comp. It was Josh Petty, offensive tackle out of Roswell, Georgia, Fellowship Christian, to Ryan Harris was Brian Smith's comp. So very interesting comp there. Brian, I saw IMG is going to be a crazy team again, as they always are. I saw Jamar Malone's the quarterback down there now out of Arizona. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's a pretty good team.
IMG conservatively has 30 Power 5 kids on their roster.
It's great. I went down there in, I think 2019. I went down there for like their media day or whatever it was, just to kind of like look around, because I'd never been to IMG. And that was the year that like it was Evan Neal and Nolan Smith and that crew, like Noah Kane and Trey Sanders and all that. And I was just like walking around. I'm like, it's just stupid. Like, it was just dumb. I was just like, all these kids are Power 5 kids. I'm like, Josh Delgado's over there, who like Oregon, and the running backs and the offensive line.
I worked at IMG at that time. And the first time that I walked through the hallways and I saw some of the kids, I'm like, these are in high school? Yeah, especially the big fellow that went on to Alabama and now with the Giants. He was like Evan was 360, 370 when he was a sophomore in high school.
It's insane, man. I saw him in person and I was like, that is the biggest human I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, and Ryan, I had seen I'd seen Mekhi Becton in person too, and I'm just like, that kid is as big as Mekhi Becton as a junior in high school, about to be a senior in high school. Like, it was just nuts. And he was just one of those kids where it was like, Evan, you have a great body. Go to Alabama, trim down a little bit, maintain, and go to the NFL and be a top 10 pick. Like, that was all it was for Evan Neal. You know what I mean? It was. And he got, of course, Nolan Smith was there, who just went in the first round, and Trey Sanders, who just transferred, obviously, this offseason from Alabama. Like, it was a nutty
Nolan
team.
Smith's Nolan's a great kid.
He was. He is. He is a great kid. I remember interviewing him, and at that age, I was like, this is a senior in high school? Like, he sounded like he was ready to go to the NFL from just like a personality perspective. I was just, okay, cool. They also had that Eric Gregory, who ended up going, I think he's at Arkansas now as a defensive lineman. He's a pretty good football player. They had a couple good linebackers. Michael Jones, who was a star at Syracuse, was down there at that time. That was a silly team, man. Silly team. Some of those teams are just the Shea Patterson year of IMG Academy was a dumb roster too. I know it's every single year, but like, I'm like thinking back to some of the best IMG teams. I'm just like, that team could have won a national championship if they would have just taken that team and developed it into college. So
the only thing they ever struggle with is chemistry, because it's definitely not they're the most talent in the country every year. It's not a question. It's just, can they gel? And they haven't always been good at quarterback. It's been iffy at times. Yes. So when they figure out quarterback, they're not getting beat.
Well, I think that was the tough part of that year was I think that year with Nolan, they had the Baldwin kid who was the lefty quarterback, and then they had the other kid that went to UAB, I think, that year. I can't remember his name.
That's not going to get
They weren't great. Yeah, they weren't great at quarterback that year. That was definitely the weak point of that roster. But that roster otherwise was pretty good. It's a pretty good roster. Right, we got a question from Bailey Brad, who said, any reason Notre Dame never really gotten foot in the door in the David Sanders recruitments? Bailey, I think it's just a little too early to say that. I think that for me, it's this. I just think they got the foot in the door a little bit, because I think David Sanders actually has some really positive things to say about Notre Dame. And he was one of those ones, Brian, that he didn't have an early offer from Notre Dame. And he was the one that was like saying, I want an offer from Notre Dame. I want an offer. So I think they had their foot in the door. Just my opinion, when you have an offensive lineman that is a little bit down south, again, he's in North Carolina, so it's not like he's in the deep south. But a kid like that who's a 5-star potential number 1 overall player, getting recruited by everyone, I think it's just a tough pull when he's not a Midwest kid to come to Notre Dame. Like, that's just kind of where my hesitation is. But I wouldn't say they don't have the foot in the door. It's just, can knock the door down. Like, I think that's the question mark for me.
Back to that point a minute ago, if Notre Dame beats USC, Ohio State, they have to do something different to get those kind of kids. That's it. Like, just to use an example, were they really going to get Jerome Bettis out of Detroit McKenzie if they hadn't beaten Michigan like 3 years in a row or something? Probably not.
Right.
That's
probably
just true. You have to prove it on the field to go in and take somebody's star player out of their backyard. You got to earn it.
Yes, 100%. I think that's really well said. I mean, you have those statements matter. They matter big time, and you have to be able to make those statements. Like, there's no doubt about it. So, yes, agree 100%. And people, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think that was a really, really well said. We had a question that was spurned off of our conversation about the 2025 board for Notre Dame. Levi Perez says, what's your dream offensive line class for 2025? I mean, the dream is like David
Sanders. It's Petty and Sanders.
Yeah.
This is a forest for the trees kind of question right here, just so you know.
Yes. I will say it like this, Brian. This is what I hope happens for Notre Dame. I think of the realistic targets you get right now: Owen Strebig, Rowan Byrne, Maddie Augustine, and you shoot for one of the elite talents at the position. That's kind of what my hope is. Because I think Strebig's a top 50 kid potentially. I think he's a really good player. Maddie Augustine is that developmental, high upside offensive tackle. And then you have Rowan Byrne, who could play multiple spots up front. That's a great 3-man class right there. Then you shoot for, hey, if you're really serious about Josh Petty, go make your move for Josh Petty, right? Like, go make your move for him. And then if you get a Josh Petty into that class or a David Sanders, you're like, okay, it's pretty dang good, right? It's pretty dang good. So I think that those 3 guys are guys that I would really want in the class. I think Notre Dame really wants in the class: Strebig, Byrne, and Augustine. And then you find who that best 4th is to match those guys. Like, that's kind of where I look at it.
I don't think they'll wait too long, but I agree with those 3. But if a kid I don't think the number matters if Petty wants to come and he calls you on December 1st.
I don't think so either.
You know what I mean? I know coaches hate it when they don't have absolute power, but I tell people this all the time, especially with Florida kids. This is the one time that the players have all the power and the coaches have nothing. Elite players make their own timeline. Coaches can bitch, they can moan, they can say, we need you to decide. The kids, especially down where I live, flip them the bird because they do it all the time. Ohio State has that rule: you're not allowed to take official visits after you commit. Jeremiah Smith's already taken 5 visits. Elite players get elite rules. It's just the way it is. It's, I'm going to go see Chaminade Madonna play here pretty soon, and I'm going to joke with Jeremiah about it. I know some of the Ohio State guys on staff, and I'm going to tell him that I'm going to make fun of him because and he'll laugh. He will, but that's just how it works. So, yeah, Petty and Sanders, even if Notre Dame has 4 by that point, if they call Marcus Freeman, I'm going to speak for Marcus now. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Marcus. We're just letting you know. But, it's just the way it is, bro.
Yeah, there's certain players every year where it's like, are they a take? And the answer is yes. At any time, they're a take. Like, we've talked about a couple guys this year, Brian. Like, obviously, Justin Scott commits to Ohio State, but Justin Scott would have been one of those guys who was always, yes, you want to come, Justin? There's always a spot for you. Always a spot. There's no doubt about it. David Sanders and Josh Petty would definitely be that for me. I think it's probably the same for Notre Dame. I think you're correct in that instance, but man, it has a chance to be a really good board for Notre Dame class in general, even without those cats. But again, get 3 of those dudes and then go for the ceilings, man. Like, just shoot for the moon. That would be my biggest thing. So yes, I agree there. I think we see that pretty similarly. We had some question. All right, we had a question from Pete Weber. Who says, who have been the meanest offensive line recruits over the last 10 years? Guys who wanted to just absolutely own their opponents. Brian, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, obviously, on the recruiting trail. Are some of their meanest guys you can recall as far as offensive line recruits? I mean, is Quentin Nelson in a 10-year span?
There's one obvious one that you should come to a conclusion with, and it's not even he's number one on the board. He wore a gold helmet.
Oh, Quentin Nelson, right? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't want to beat players. He wanted to maim them.
You wanted to
forget which guy it was, but somebody on NFL Network said every time he got done just doing whatever he had to do, on Monday morning, he would go they got access to all the film. First thing he would do is go see, well, what did Quentin Nelson do to somebody this week? And I'm like, damn. And that's NFL film. You know what I mean? Like, he's not pushing around a college. These are guys making millions of dollars that he's beating the snot out of. Yes. You know, like last year was the first time he wasn't like all NFL, all pro.
Yes, I know, man.
But I said he was the only guy in that draft that I thought was just surefire. He's going to be a Hall of Fame player. I think that's pretty safe that he's going to end up there.
He was outside. He was a top-rated player that year. Obviously, not working in positional value because that's going to work some guys.
Yeah, but he was the safest pick. Name a guard you would rank higher than him. It's not even.
I've never graded an offensive lineman that ranked as high as him on my board. Like, he was that good. I'll say another guy, Brian, that I remember as a recruit that came out and he was just like beating the snot out of dudes. Paris Johnson Jr. I remember seeing some clips of him where I'm like, that dude is just dominating dudes, man. Like, just absolutely owning cats. Like, oh man, he was fun. He was a fun player.
The other kid, he started last year at LSU, the big offensive tackle. He was out of Monroe, Louisiana, a big white kid. He's ridiculous. He can do everything. I forget his name. I started to meet like immediately. So, but there aren't many guys that have that mentality that also have the footwork to play right away. Yeah.
I didn't see Landon Dickerson coming out of high school, but he was one of those kids in college that was like, he was hurt all the time when he was at Florida State and Bama. But I remember his film coming out of Bama was just like, that dude just wants to hurt people. Like, he just wants to absolutely physically.
He was good, man.
Yeah.
He was really good.
So that's another guy that comes to mind. I'm trying to think of a couple
Will
of
Campbell
guys.
Said it in the chat. Will Campbell for LSU.
Oh, Will Campbell. Yeah. Yeah. Well, they had two freshman offensive tackles, right? Campbell and Emory Jones was the other one, right? That started as freshman last year, I think.
Might be. Campbell was. I thought Campbell was the unquestioned best lineman in that class. So he was a dude.
We just had another question for you, Brian. Obviously, it's in your stomping grounds, but Nathan Milton said, Brian, who is the most underrated Florida recruits in the 2023 class? Can you be underrated out of the state of Florida? I joke because you can, but yes.
There's a kid that I think Notre Dame and everybody will recruit. His name is Tyler Williams. He's from Sumner High School. It's just south of Tampa. He's a kid that I guarantee you is going to blow up. He's got a few offers. I don't know what it is in the water down here because the number over under yearly. This puts things in perspective, how much talent is down here. 40. And what am I talking about? 40, not 40 college players, 40 college receivers is the minimum. And I'm being dead serious. Like, you can count them up. Tyler is a kid that plays at Sumner. If he played at Tampa Jesuit or Lakeland, like Lakeland's right down the street from me, and a couple other schools, he'd have 10 plus already. Sumner is just south. It's the area, Riverview, and that right before Bradenton. Doesn't quite get as much attention, but the school's growing and their reputation and everything. That kid is going to blow up and end up with 25 plus offers. It's just Florida. They'll find him. But I watched his film. I'm like, why doesn't he have 20 offers already? This is not hard.
That's a 24 kid, Tyler Williams?
25. I'm sorry. Oh, he's 3 or 4. Yeah, he's 5. 23, 24.
That's still a great mention though. So we'll definitely keep our eye on Tyler Williams for 2025.
24, probably Breedell Richardson, just to bring it around. He's a kid, another receiver, shocker, but he plays Carrollwood Day in Tampa. He finally got the offers and stuff, but nobody talked about him because he's not a burner. He's incredible balls, except for Jeremiah Smith, and I always have to use him. He's himself, and then there's everybody else. He has the best ball skills in 50-50 situation in the country. Breedell's 50-50 balls are incredible. I don't know where he's going to go. He kind of waited too long, and I have no idea what's going on with him. I know him personally, but his recruitment
it's weird,
is wild.
Man. Like he's talking to a lot of the northern schools like Michigan State, and then obviously he's planning on potentially taking an official visit to Notre Dame, and it's very strange recruitment.
I told Breedell a while back to his face, I said, dude, you're waiting too long to set these visits. These schools are going to fill up.
Yes, they are. I mean, yeah, man, we'll see what happens, but yeah, it's fascinating because Breedell is a good football player. I agree 100%. I mean, he's good, man. I mean, yeah. Question, Brian. I know Shamanad Madonna also has Jojo Trader, who is a very good player as well. Do you see him more as a wide receiver? What'd you say?
They got 5.
What'd you say?
They have 5.
I know. It's absolutely silly. Do you like Trader better on offense or on defense? Because I've heard some people kind of go back and forth with that one.
Here's the real short answer. It's not even close. He's the best corner in the country if he wants to play it. He has no interest in playing it. None. The kid that signed with LSU out of Gulliver Prep last year, there was a 7-on-7 game, and he's a year younger. And he came up and played bunk coverage on him. He latched onto him and threw him out of bounds. It was one of those plays, and I'm standing there, I'm like, holy crap. And then I was told that he doesn't even take corner seriously. And I'm like, okay. But like his ball skills are crazy. He can do a backflip and catch the ball with one hand in the same motion.
Yeah. Oh man, I think it might be a mistake though, man. I know he's probably he's a really good wide receiver. I've seen his films.
He gets mad at me when I say something to him about it. He doesn't like it, but we all tell him the same thing. You're better at corner.
Well, Brian, because I remember J.C. Horn. I had a really good relationship with J.C. Horn, and I still talk to him pretty regularly. But I remember his dad was the one, because J.C. was a really good wide receiver coming out of high school as well. But his dad, Joe Horn, who obviously was a great wide receiver in the NFL level, was like, J.C., you're playing corner, dude. You're not playing wide receiver. You know why? Because there's not a lot of you that play corner at the next level that look like you, but there's a lot of wide receivers that look like you. There's a lot of them that look like you. And I think that's so smart, man. And the kid goes number 8 overall. It's like, what a great business decision by his father to be like, dude, you are a corner. You are not a wide receiver at the NFL level. And
it's funny because you can be slightly better than average at corner with the right size and go in the first round because nobody wants to play. Everybody wants to play receiver.
Yep.
Nobody's covering Jeremiah Smith anyway. So you got to have someone that can slot guys and this and that. You're going to make it longer at corner. That lasts longer. It's the easier money. I don't get it, man. Whatever.
I don't get it at all, man. Like I really don't. Again, like I remember JC telling me that. He's like, yeah, I thought I was going to play wide receiver in college. And he's like, my dad told me, nope, you're playing corner. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Okay, we'll do that. So, and it has ended up very well. He played really well as a sophomore after being hurt as a rookie. So J.C. Horn is a good football player. And I think his dad understood that there's rarer things that come around. We had a question from D. McAnally, excuse me. Notre Dame's cookout is coming up at the end of the month. What do you think Notre Dame will serve? And if you were responsible, what would you cook? Man, people keep joking about this so much, Brian, because it's like, is it a cookout? Is it a barbecue? Am I getting brisket and great stuff? Am I getting hot dogs and burgers? Look, I have talked to some Notre Dame recruits in the past, some commits that say that they always get hooked up with some great food. So I'm sure no matter what it will be, they're going to get some good food. And it's going to be free, obviously. So, like, cool, we'll get some food. You know what I mean? So, whatever, man. Whatever. If it were me, I'd be like, I'm a simple guy with barbecue. I don't know about you, Brian, but I'd be like, just some nice burgers, some chicken. I'm a pretty simple taste barbecue guy. So, I mean, if you want to throw me some brisket, cool. You want to get some burnt ends out there, awesome. But like, I don't need it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need it, but it's just me. All right, we had another question. This one's interesting, Brian, because this is right down in Florida as well. I actually have an interview that's coming out with Sean Sevillano, who, of course, is the talented defensive tackle out of Clearwater Academy International. Nathan Milton asked, what are your thoughts on Sean Sevillano Jr., who is obviously 2024 defensive tackle committed to the University of Notre Dame?
Two things on him. He's finally kind of gotten into a groove in terms of like how he's going to play, what he wants to do. Always been an aggressive kid, very intelligent. Like his stance has gotten better, his ability to get off, all those things. And I didn't think that he was a guy that could play both spots necessarily till I saw him live at a practice. I think he could play 3 technique or 1 technique, especially third and long. It's not going to matter. He's got really good hands. He just doesn't necessarily look the part because he's a pudgy kid. He just needs to redistribute some of his weight. But, dude, his get-off is nasty. He is a one-gap-and-go interior defensive lineman that fits what Freeman does. If you rank him generically, his value is not as good as it is for Notre Dame. That's one of the reasons I hate recruiting rankings. But that's a story for another day because a 3 technique for Alabama is not really a 3 technique. They run a different kind of system. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't fit what they do. So every system's a little different. Anyway, he is also a kid that gets Notre Dame super articulate and will fit right in with the student body that will help him adjust and play earlier for the Irish.
So I've had the chance to talk to him over the phone, and I will say this, Brian. I thought I was talking to a kid that's a junior in college. Like that's kind of the vibe that I got. I mean, he's a very well-spoken kid. He's got the Canadian roots, obviously. He's from I forget what part of Canada he's from. It'll come to me in a second. But obviously he came down to Clearwater International and you want to talk about stat sheet? He had 50 tackles for loss and 22 sacks last year at American International. Again, I know it's not the greatest level down there in Florida, but like 50 tackle for loss and 22 sacks is pretty good, man. It's pretty good production for a year. So we shall see. But we'll see what happens with him. I know I wasn't like super pumped about him initially, but I'm starting to come around a little bit on Sean Sevillano. I'm hoping for a big senior year.
He actually will be playing against a bunch of the bigger schools this year. They don't shed a tear for they play Palmetto, which Davion Dixon, et cetera. They play a lot of teams. They do not care. So he will be challenged because he's going to go up against a lot of massive young men. So it'll be interesting to see how much more of a step Sean takes as a senior.
Yep. Yeah, that's going to be a great game to see too, with Dixon and Sevillano teaming up to go against each other. 100%. Not directly, but even though Sean Sevillano did play some center last year, not many people know that, but he had to fill in his center at one point. So.
The center for CAI is going to Southern Cal. So Dixon will be going against the guy that he's going to see in college. It's a small world.
That's true. Yeah, I know. I just wrote an article about him this morning that'll be out on the site, and it was just like, got a lot of dudes that are going Power 5, man. They have a kid that's going to Miami, I think, as a safety down there. They got a couple kids going up to Minnesota. Like, yeah, man, they got some guys. So quarterback apparently is a decent little player too, going to Washington State. So I have to see him in person. We had another question from, if it will come up, there it is, Pete Weber. What stats measures do the Notre Dame coaches use to evaluate how good of a job an offensive lineman is doing? Pete, I think that this is the biggest one because I assume that you're asking me for the team that is currently there, right? So the evaluation process isn't as much intact anymore, right? Like they got their guys, they evaluate them as high school players. They saw the size measurables, the arm length, the wingspan, all that great stuff, and they were like, they're a fit for Notre Dame. I think that what you're asking me is, I think that this is where some analytics get completely thrown out the building, right? It's like, I'm not worried about a yard per attempt average, a yard per after contact average as a running back, those types of measurables that show me how good a player is. Offensive line coaches are very film driven. How is the guy doing on film? How is he working with the players around him? So I don't think there's too many stats that really show how great an offensive line is. I think it's more the film that really tells that story. I mean, yes, if a running back's running for a lot of yards, offensive line most likely is playing very well. If a quarterback is not getting sacked a ton, offensive line is coming pretty well. But those stats can be a little misguided at times. I mean, some running backs make up for bad offensive lines. Some quarterbacks can buy time or get the ball out super quick. So sack numbers are going to be a little bit low. I think about USC last year, Brian. It's like, I think USC's offensive line was very good, but they had Caleb Williams who never gets sacked. Like he always breaks out. He never gets sacked. So the sack numbers are going to be down.
Compare Caleb Williams. Yeah, compare Caleb Williams to what Notre Dame had a couple years ago, a quarterback who was a statue. If you had that same offensive line at USC in front of him, oh my God, he would have been destroyed. Yeah, every now and then there's a player so special, it doesn't really matter. Like John Elway played at Stanford. They were not very good. If they didn't have John Elway, they'd have won 3 or 4 games. They had John Elway, though. They beat Oklahoma on the road. Like they were like a 20-point underdog. They beat Oklahoma. They had John freaking Elway. So it's about who you're blocking for just as much as how talented you are.
It's very true. We had Arch that asked a question. He wants to know what elite top 50 level, 2025 recruits do you think Notre Dame will land that would surprise other programs? The surprise other programs is where things get a little bit muffled. Because, I don't think anybody's going to be shocked if Owen Strebig ends up at Notre Dame. I don't think anybody, teams down south are going to be like, oh, man, that's a surprise. Yeah, okay, a Wisconsin kid is going to play at Notre Dame. He's a top 50 kid, in my opinion. Surprise is a great one. If Josh Petty ended up at Notre Dame, that would be a surprise. That would surprise me. I think Deuce Knight's a top 50 kid. Do you think, Brian, from your perspective, as far as being down south, do you think it would be surprising if Deuce Knight committed to Notre Dame as of right now? I mean, Tennessee and Notre Dame are obviously his top 2 right now.
I mean, Deuce is a kid I know pretty well. He's not a typical Mississippi kid. He could go wherever. It wouldn't surprise me no matter where he signed. The kid that I'm picking for this question would be Jarquez Carter. The only reason he's not ranked higher now is because he's at Newberry High School, which is about the size of my computer. It's this big. It's like a 1 or 2A high school that's just west of Gainesville, Florida. Again, if he played at Lakeland, Tampa Jesuit, Chaminade Madonna, blah, 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 he'd be through the roof. He's got quite a few offers, but the ranking thing is a little iffy. He's an elite talent, and I know Davion's recruiting him to Notre Dame, and he's coming up for the barbecue or whatever the hell it's called. And he's a kid that I think would surprise people, but he's a real high academic kid too. 3.7, 3.8 GPA. He could end up at Notre Dame.
That's a great pick. I saw his film one time, Brian. I'm like, I could not care less what this ring is. I would take that kid at Notre Dame yesterday if he wanted to come. He is a very good player.
100%.
Jarquez Carter, come on down, man. So people will push back on that answer, though, because they'll be like, he's not a top 50 kid. And I'm like, but he could be. He could be a top 50 kid eventually.
I'm telling you, once his film circulates and he goes to the combines next spring, talk to me then.
Yes, 100%. I think that's a really good one. A sleeper pick for me would be Jadon Blair, who is a safety out of North Carolina. That would be a sleeper pick for me. I think that kid is top 50 all day, and he's a North Carolina kid. Notre Dame's having more and more success in North Carolina, but still getting that kid to come up north would still be a big win for Notre Dame. Someone said Talon Taylor. Talon wouldn't be it wouldn't surprise other programs. He's an Illinois kid. You know what I mean? Yes, it would be a great get, no doubt about it. But would anybody be shocked if Talon Taylor went to Notre Dame? I wouldn't be shocked at all. He's literally an Illinois kid. He's Geneva community. I mean, that's not a shocker.
What about the safety from Winter Garden, West Orange in Florida? He's coming back up for the visit on the July 30th.
Oh, it's Ivan Taylor. Yeah.
That would, because he's got Florida ties. Notre Dame doesn't get a lot of Florida kids. That would be pretty interesting. He's got offers from everybody.
That would be a really good one. Another one that I think is an interesting one is Chuck McDonald out of Modern Day out in California. I think that would surprise some folks a little bit, but he really likes Notre Dame. So I would not be shocked if he ended up at Notre Dame. Again, I wouldn't necessarily predict him to Notre Dame today, but like I wouldn't be like super shocked if Chuck McDonald ended up at Notre Dame. So that would be another one. Other than that, I don't think there's like too many like surprises. Like you said, Ivan Taylor is a really good one. If he ended up at Notre Dame, it will be a second time on campus for the barbecue. So that's a good step for them. Josh Petty would be a massive surprise to me. Deuce Knight, I think some people would be surprised about if you don't know Deuce. Like me and you have gotten to know Deuce a little bit, so like it's not a shock to us. But I think some people will be like, Notre Dame's getting a Mississippi kid? They haven't gotten a Mississippi kid since 1998 or something like that. Like that would be a surprise, I think, somewhat. So, oh, that's a good one. Someone just put in the chat, Brian. This is an interesting one. Devin Williams out of the state of Georgia is one that would surprise some folks.
Yes. Is he the corner? Yeah. But he goes to Buford, right? Is he the Buford kid?
Yes.
Okay,
that Buford kid.
Here's the deal there, man. And I know that program well. When you go to that school and you walk on the property and everything, if you didn't know where you were, you'd say this is a small college. There's money everywhere. It's articulate, and it's not like deep south like you think of one of the big magnet schools that everybody in the county goes to one school. There are literally schools like that in Central Georgia. It's just outside of Atlanta. It'd be easier. Getting a Buford kid is like Darius Walker played at Buford, the running back from Notre Dame.
Sure.
That's a little different. It wouldn't shock me, but because he's from Georgia, somebody might be surprised. But it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he picked Notre Dame at all because he has visited once, loves Notre Dame, one of the top 2 to 3 schools that he mentions every single time I get a chance to talk to him. And he's already trying to get back up to campus sometime soon, whether it's the end of the summer or in the fall. So he's going to be up to campus in multiple times before his junior year starts, most likely. So like it's a good sign. It's a good positive sign, obviously. So
not what you say, it's what you do. If he comes back again for Ohio State or a USC or something, then you know you got something.
Yeah. Well, Jadon Blair was that guy for me, Brian, because like I love Jadon Blair's film. He really likes Notre Dame, every time I talk to him, but he hadn't visited, right? So I'm like, all right, like, is this a legitimate one? But now he's coming out to campus this summer. So it's like, oh, okay, like there might actually be legitimate interest here. So Ivan Taylor, though, the one that you picked earlier, that's a really good one because Notre Dame has had obviously their troubles in Florida over the years. So if they were able to get a kid like that out of Florida, that would be a very big get. There's no doubt about that. Great question, Archer. Thank you for that one. And Josh Buffo, the Motivational Business Bank, had a question. Hopefully it pops up at some point. Here we go. If you could have one of these players on this season's team, who would you take? Safety Drew Tranquill or hypothetical rover Tom Zbikowski? I would take Tom Zbikowski in this question because I know we say hypothetical rover Tom Zbikowski, but I think the weakest position on Notre Dame's defense right now is safety. That's it, right? So yeah, does Tom Zbikowski have some of his inconsistencies in pass coverage at times? Yes. Is he going to gamble at times? Yes. But Tom Zbikowski was still a really good football player, man. So he would be one of my starting safeties on Notre Dame's defense. He wouldn't be a rover for me. Drew Tranquill. Drew's a really good player, but like safety Drew Tranquill, because that was obviously his first 2 years. Drew was always a guy that you wanted coming more towards the line of scrimmage. Tom would be a better player from depth. So I would take Tom Zbikowski personally. And Tom would also be a really good punt returner for me. So like
there's the part.
Yeah.
That's why I was going to say the same. His vision with the football, for people that don't know, he was an option quarterback in high school. He was phenomenal high school football player. And I think that the extra point there with the special teams, you're darn right.
Every time Notre Dame needed a big play those last couple of years with Zibby, I felt like he made it, Brian. Like from a punt return perspective, scoop and score, like big hit, just made so many great plays, man. He was just a really good football player. We had Archer who had a question. We're kind of winding down already. So if anybody wants to get a couple more questions in here, Archer452, how many commitments from the July cookout do you expect? Over, under 3.5? Long-term, Archer, if we're talking about just the entirety of 2025, I expect over 3.5 in that cookouts at the end of the month for Notre
Is
Dame.
he? How long is he talking about though? Like, is he talking within 2 days of it? Yeah, within a month, 1 or 2. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I would say coming out, you most likely maybe have 1, maybe 2 guys that are silent commits to Notre Dame. We'll see, obviously, when the announcement happens. Like, that would kind of be my guess. So it would be under if we're talking about like the immediacy. But if we're just talking long term of that group, how many guys end up in Notre Dame's class when it's all said and done? I would say over the 3.5, because I really think that Notre Dame has valued a lot of guys that can be on campus. And like I said, most of the guys that Notre Dame is extremely high on in that group are guys that are coming back for the second, third time this offseason, which that says a lot. I mean, Rowan Burns is going to be there now. It's going to be his third time on campus in his career. Ethan Long's been on campus now. This will be his second time. Matty Augustine will be the second time. Owen Strebig's been on campus 3 times. Deuce Knights, although not technically a part of it a couple days before, he'll be on campus twice out of the state of Mississippi. So there's Talon Taylor's been on campus at least 2 times, probably more in the past because he's an Illinois kid. So there's a lot of kids that are going to be on campus that have been there multiple times, which I think is big. All right. We had a question from Berkshire Yank who said, I think Notre Dame is missing out on the Pritchett boys. Of course, this is Wes Pritchett's son. Lawson is the 2024 linebacker, and Marshall Pritchett is the tight end in 2025. They're Georgia kids. They are hungry and hard-nosed kids. Thoughts on them? Berkshire, I would say this, because Brian, I don't know how much you've seen of the Pritchett kids. Both of them obviously made the trip up to Notre Dame for the Irish Invasion. I like the tight end in 2025. He would be a kid that I would keep close eyes on if I was Notre Dame. Lawson, I think, is a good football player. I'm not sure he's a Notre Dame caliber linebacker, in my opinion, but I think Marshall's a really talented tight end, though. I do like him a lot in the 2025 class, but obviously Notre Dame has a very good board of tight ends right now in 2025. So I think they're both good football players. I do.
That's pretty much where I'm at. I don't think either one of them is an immediate take. Tight end at Notre Dame, that is a small board, brother. They pick pretty well. That's the only thing, because, how many guys are you going to take? And they already got arguably the best tight end in the 25 class. It's going to be hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and Marshall I really like his ball skills. He's got some length to him. I mean, he's like a legit 6'4.5", 6'5", which is awesome. But he's only 205, 210 pounds right now, right? So there's some projection that still needs to happen there as far as body type and getting some weight on his frame and all that type of stuff. So we shall see. We had a question, because I think we're down to 4 here. PK says, how much importance do you put in getting Kenny Minchey playing time in 2023, i.e. pull Sam Hartman early with big leads on weak sisters? Weak sisters, that's funny. PK, for me, I think it's important, right? Like, you have the 4-game redshirt rule now so that you can get some guys playing time without burning red shirts. Like, that's great. And I think that for me, more than likely, Kenny Minchey is going to be the likely one to be more in the, because I'll put it like this. CJ Carr is going to be here for 2024. You're going to have Kenny Minchey coming back. You're going to have Steve Angeli coming back. But I think the anticipation is that Kenny Minchey is more in the quarterback 1 conversation than Steve Angeli is. Like, he'll have his opportunities to win that as well. But I think your hopes are that Kenny Minchey's that guy that can compete for that playing time at that point. So I would love to get his feet wet. I would love to get him some action. I don't want him to just get in there and just hand the ball off a couple times and call that, playing time, right? Like, I want him to be able to get legitimate opportunity. So it would be big for me for Kenny Minchey to get some playing time this year, no doubt.
I'm just curious to see if he gets that, because Angeli is going to be ahead of him, I would imagine, at least early on in the fall. Is he – I don't know the answer to that, though. I mean, fall camp things that's why you have fall camp. Minchey's got more talent. So I think he'll eventually pass him. How quickly, though?
I don't know if you want to answer this one, Brian. Nathan Milton just said most overrated Florida prospects. I don't know if you want to go down that rabbit hole, but
I have to deal with these coaches and parents, brother.
Nathan,
do I have an opinion on that? Yes.
Yes, I think we both have an opinion on that. And
Hell no.
Nathan, I think I think it's a great question. I think that that's a message board question for sure. I'm just not trying to alienate some players and
Yeah,
coaches on this podcast. That's all.
yeah.
So it's
I
a
know
fun
better,
question.
man. I've been around too long. I ain't touching that one, brother. It's nothing personal. But
Mm,
parents read a lot of these message boards and they get I ain't messing with it.
yes. Yes. And I need to do my job, man. And I'm hoping that Notre Dame continues to get into flow more. So I am not burning those bridges right now. I'm not doing that. But fair question, Nathan. If you want to put it on the message board, I'm sure we can have some fun discussion about that one. We had our last couple questions here. Notre Dame cheat sheet says, other than IMG Academy and Modern Day, if you could pick 3 high schools to be feeder schools to Notre Dame, which schools would you choose?
There's one that's
That's
unbelievably obvious, and that's St. Thomas
okay.
Aquinas. St. John
Yeah.
Bosco would be another. There isn't one right now, Ryan, in Chicago, but if
No.
in that area, you would think, but I mean, there's not like a dominant school, is there? I mean,
Not really. Not to that degree, because there's a couple of schools I would love to have a pipeline in and continue to recruit at a high level, but like a kid every once in a couple years, right? Like
mean,
not every single year. I would
St.
want to go to St.
Francis
John
should be one.
Bosco. Yeah.
Like all
Yeah.
they're terrible at recruiting Maryland. And I don't think it's Notre
Yes.
Dame's fault. I think it's NIL. I'll just go ahead and say it. That's the problem. But St. Francis and schools like that, those kids, there's a 25 corner that Notre Dame's recruiting from St. Francis. It's really good that might break that. But most of those kind of kids, man, they don't care about where they went to high school and all. Immediate money and NFL. That's what they're looking for. So it's hard to pick another one. I don't know.
St. Francis is a good one. I would say it'd be like St. Francis or DeMatha, one of those 2 schools in Maryland. Like get into one of those Catholic schools down there. St. John Bosco, agree 1,000,000,000%. Like again, you need kids that yes, you need kids that know how to win. They know how to win. They're also a Catholic school by trade, right? Like there's things that make sense to that marriage. I'm trying to think like if there's a Texas school I would want to get into consistently.
There's a ton, but how many are realistic? Because that's all public schools. It's a different deal. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. Like one of the schools in North Carolina or Georgia might be a good fit. Buford, to be honest, might be one.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Because even though it's public, it's an affluent area. There's money, there's tradition, they get it. And Darius Walker played there. If you want to go to public school, that would be one.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a very interesting one. Maryland is a very interesting one to your point, though. That's a really, really good one.
Look, I know what's going on up there. Most of those kids, if you're not paying that front NIL, you're not getting the top kids there. You're not.
Yep.
That's why Notre Dame's not getting the kids. Not even coming close.
And they need to have some traction in there. Yeah, I mean, because the only kid they've been close on the last couple of years is they finished second for Jason Moore in the 2023 class out at the DeMatha. Like, other than that, it's like – and St. Francis in 2025 is stupid, man. There's so much talent in that class.
Their entire secondary is like college kids.
Blake Woodby and Kevin Humes, and like, man, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. So yes, you're not right. You're not wrong there.
I'm going to the St. Francis IMG game this year.
Oh, that's gonna be a fun one. That's gonna be a really fun one.
There'll be a couple of kids there that you'll probably watch film on.
Yes, there will. There was another game someone sent me the other day. What was it? I forget what game it was, but I think there's an IMG Academy game. Let me do my research real quick here, because someone sent me this game that's like pretty close to me. I'm like, yeah, I need to definitely go to that game. There's no doubt about it. They're
probably playing the Philadelphia school, St. Joe's.
St. Joe's Prep is playing IMG Academy in Ocean City, New Jersey this season.
Good luck to St. Joe's.
Good luck to St. Joe's. Well, Notre Dame is taking Notre Dame is heavily recruiting Anthony Sacca out of St. Joe's, the safety linebacker. So they love him a ton.
He's a good player.
Yes, he's a very good player. So I might have to get down to that one for sure. Ocean City is about an hour away from me. So that is definitely one that I should be at. Last question. We have from PK. Said, I may be one of the few who like Anthony Knapp, evidently. Something about attitude, hand, and foot speed, especially attitude, guard with 36-inch arms. I would just say this, PK. I like a lot of what Anthony Knapp is. I really do. I remember I was like one of the few that was like, I like this kid's film. I like it. The problem is that I think they passed on a better football player to get Anthony Knapp. That was just kind of my back on it. And there's no way Anthony Knapp has 36-inch arms. Zero chance. I mean, 36-inch arms is a rare feat. There have been like 4 players in the last 15, 20 years that have come out into the NFL that had 36+ inch arms. So he does not have 36-inch arms. I've heard that he might have 34-inch arms, which would still be a great number. 34-inch arms are really long. That's really good. But 36 is, there's zero chance that he has 36-inch arms. But Brian, I don't know if you've seen Anthony Knapp much, but like, I like Anthony Knapp. I just think that they passed on a better football player for him. Like, that was just kind of my whole thing. That's just me.
I wonder if they took him because he's a versatile kid that could play tackle, but he's a guarantee at guard as a guy that could at least be competitive. I don't know if they think he can play center. What they're looking for at center, I'm not sure, but he's a good athlete. He's a kid that Joe Moore would have liked. But I mean, I like anybody when Joe Moore's coaching him, but that's another story. So there's a reason it's called the Joe Moore Award.
You're not right.
He was unbelievable. But I don't know. I mean, how many kids like that are you going to take? Like him and Laoded and a few of the other kids they've taken the last couple of years project better inside, in my opinion. You better hit on a couple of them, though. So that's the thing.
Absolutely. Yep. Those high upside kids, I'm good with taking 1 or 2 of them every single year, but you need to develop properly if you're going to do that. That is the biggest thing. So that's going to do it for today's show. Again, want to thank you all so much for working through some technical difficulties. Really do appreciate it. Great mailbag at the end to end everything off. Want to urge everybody, boards@irishbreakdown.com, recruiting intel, team intel will continue to be plugging out here. Want to thank everybody again. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. 5-star reviews are always very much appreciated. That's Brian Smith. I'm Ryan Roberts. We'll catch you all again next time on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.